He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man, the dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time.
All right, guys, this episode is a bit of an experiment. What I've decided to do is to re-release and remaster an old episode, or series of episodes, rather, I did with my friend Luthemplaer. Did this 2 years ago when I was much smaller. So I stitched them together into one episode, fixed the audio, did a few other little things to make it sound better. And I want to represent it because I think it's some of my best work. I think it's important. And I was much, much smaller when this initially came out. So let me know what you think about this. I don't think it's filler. I'm adding extra value in the sense that it's all collated in one spot and the quality is much better. But leave me some feedback on this. Tell me what you think either way. And we can either keep doing this because there are other figures I've talked to many times. We have series we could collate into, one large episode. Once they're done, of course, I don't want to do it kind of in situ, but I think that this is perhaps worth doing. So let me know what you think on this, and we can either discontinue or keep doing it depending on what you guys think. Appreciate it. And now on to the episode. All right, Luthemplaer, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
Hello, once again.
So I'm going to kind of speed through this because we're covering quite a lot of material here. Yes. So before we get into it, could you just describe kind of like who you are and how you ended up here?
I am Luthemplaer, previously known as Cringewalker. I bumped into this space, I guess through Sargon. AA was on a show. AA did a Star Wars Empire Did Nothing Wrong meme video. Named myself Cringewalker as a result of that. Decided that's not a brand name that can be very popular, so Luthemplaer is a better name. Kind of a merger of Luther and Templar, although I would probably call myself a Catholic who likes Luther these days. But anyway, that's a little quick intro. I primarily showed up in Lambda's Bible studies last year.
Well, in addition to that, you're also the main creative behind the Restoration Bureau, correct? So could you describe what that is?
Yes, I am the director of the Restoration Bureau. No, it's like AI art started showing up, and I was like, hey, this is a tool. I'm not gonna just like be a cheapo and just generate art. But I viewed it as a way of rapidly producing propaganda, and I saw a lack of positive vision in the right wing this past 2 years, and a lot of discussions on what that would look like. So I thought, why don't I just like try to get the best catchphrases, riddles, rhymes, witticisms? Like, how can I make something that's like, 2 sentences that each rhyme with each other, that kind of get a short, simple point about the dissident right that can be popularly consumed, like the opposite of a leftist meme. Seems to have been popular. I'm going to keep doing it. My goal is to do one piece a day for a year, and so far so good.
Yeah, it's really good work. I've been impressed, and obviously you put a lot of work into it, but I would kind of describe it for the people who haven't encountered it, and it's linked down in the description if you guys want to check it out. It's kind of like, I don't mean to say propaganda in a negative sense, but kind of like propaganda for our guys. So you can, in addition to just like appreciating it and looking at it, I think that you sold prints as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, everybody wanted me to sell prints, and I'm struggling to find the time to manage the shop. I'm gonna add more. Try to do one for Christmas. Some people got some stuff on time, some people didn't. Sorry. But yeah, people like it. I guess it's people are putting up on their walls to encourage them on the day. I feel very happy about that. It's this little thing that reminds you that what you see on the TV is a bunch of BS. Remember your foundations, remember your roots. You come from a great people and a great religion and a great history.
Well, I think that's a really noble goal, but we're not here to talk about your important creative work. We're actually here because you, for months on end, successfully badgered me into reading a particularly, I guess, like influential work. So do you want to introduce our topic?
Yeah, after I read it over the summer, a little bit earlier in March, I wanted to get a lot of people I know in these circles to read it. It's the it's officially called The Remembrance of Earth's Past, but it's typically known as the Three Body Trilogy. This is it's not actually a trilogy. There's a prequel and a post-sequel, if you will, but it's Shisheng Liang's sci-fi trilogy he wrote in the early 2000s, vaguely inspired by Asimov and a few other famous writers from the last century. In many ways, it's kind of like the introduction to pseudo-traditional Chinese science fiction, or revamp for the modern age. I found it really interesting in its criticisms of essentially democracy. It has a few valid criticisms of Western thinking, a few criticisms of Eastern thinking, which is surprising for them to write something that's like self-critical. I don't know how he got some of this stuff published in China. It does get kind of critical of some of the standard Chinese propaganda, but it is a thinker. It makes you think, and if you like it like me, you'll end up really getting paranoid of the night sky. I'll say that.
So here's my take on it, because what I want to do is kind of a general overview of the book. And I should say at the very beginning, you guys should all go read these books. They're worth your time. You can find free audiobooks if you're illiterate. I actually already owned all of them. I'd read the first one when it first was translated and never transitioned to the rest of the series. I was in high school. It was a bad decision because there's a lot in these books. They're really worth your time. And like I've discussed, with other guests, that there's a lot in sci-fi that you can take from it. This idea of kind of like exploring extreme human conditions through sci-fi is something I find really interesting. And I will also say, in addition to being, an interesting thought exercise, this is also probably in the top 5 to 10% as far as literary skill goes, ranked against other sci-fi. There's a lot of sci-fi that's pretty mathematically written. This is actually like quite a fun book to read. It's quite well written and in many places kind of poetic. So in all cases, I consider this a hearty recommend. If you do care about, spoilers, if you do care about plot points, you should probably, sit this one out, go read the book, and then come back to it. Because this is a good thing to go into with kind of fresh eyes, so to speak.
Yeah, we'll try to avoid some of the big spoilers because it's worth reading and getting the shock value out of it. We'll try to, I believe Jay Burden said from the outward in, so avoiding the major key spoilers and touching more on the tangential consequential topics, maybe.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. So I will say kind of my first initial thoughts on this, because the first book, The Three Body Problem, is introduced in an opener that I really like, where essentially we are following, one of the main characters of the first book as she and her father go through the Chinese Cultural Revolution, right? Her father is an academic and ends up being killed. And kind of like the hook of the book, so to speak, the inciting event of the story is, her being sent out on what essentially is like a penal legion for, academics, right?
Yeah. and that's the cool thing, because like she's kind of like, I would argue a lot of the male readers in here are going to relate to her. Let's be frank, she's a femcel.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And so my point in bringing that up is, in addition to being just something I'd not read about, especially when I first came across the book in probably 2014, 2015, but this book is truly Chinese in the sense that not only the events, how they're discussed and how the characters interact is fundamentally Chinese. It is not American. And when you see Americans in the book, because they're Americans, or in essentially every part of the story, it's kind of a funny mirror to see your culture reflected back, right? Like every American is essentially, like an exaggerated, like Ramboized version. And I liked reading something that was truly, it was both modern and of its culture. There was no sense of homogenization in it.
I'd also say it's not mocking of Americans. It does emphasize a lot of our qualities as a people, as a culture. We said Rambo American because like a lot of them you get that vibe, but they're not dumb people. They're not like uneducated people. And by the end of the book, like one of the main characters, an American, is essentially providing the solution to the problem, and the Chinese character who's the protagonist is just ignoring him. And so it is very and this is, I'll say, this is actually to Liu Cixing's style of writing. The Three Body Trilogy is there is basically a prequel called Ball Lightning, which takes place a few years before Three Body Problem, and involves a war between China and America, and essentially like coming to an armistice condition. It's a decent book, and it kind of sets the universe up. Some of the characters show up in later books, but it is in many ways independent. But Liu Cixin cares about showing the Americans as like, yeah, this is how they like. It's not a thing to be mocked. It's just it's a different beast. He views Americans as this. They're not Chinese. They're a different beast.
Right, and that's why, in many ways, this book is profoundly anti-liberal, because in almost every sci-fi setting, even the quote-unquote based sci-fi settings, humans are kind of taken as a kind of like a true blank slate, right? Like every human is interchangeable. Pick your the sci-fi universe of your choice. But in this one, even in kind of like the far future, there are cultural differences. There are strong cultural differences. At multiple points across several thousand pages, human civilization essentially expands to by orders of magnitude, right?
Yeah.
And in each one of these, we still see cultural differences, right? Humanity doesn't become truly homogenized, which I think is interesting because it's kind of a buried premise in a lot of science fiction, that essentially like, oh, humans will just become essentially an interchangeable piece. And I like that is something that the author doesn't indulge in.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked is that when we do get into the future, there is no united Earth like navy. There are regional space navies that carry on the nature of the nations that built them and funded them, but still retain a distinct quality of where they come from. Like there's like the North American fleet, the Asian Pacific fleet, and the European fleet, and these are distinct great cultures that have their own fleet tactics, their own like ship designs, their own nature to them. And even the way the crews interact with each other retain a lot of familiar traits of what it was like, well, what's a distinct nature in like Chinese naval tradition or American naval tradition, or more accurately Anglo-Saxon naval tradition. The book is very respectful to like these rich traditions we've built as cultures that they can't really homogenize their fine-tuned weapons that we've each developed by our own origin myth, basically.
Right, and I want to get into like the specific events of the book a little bit. I know that I've fully warned people that if they're interested, they should tune out. But one of the other things, and this is in addition to kind of like the recognition of the difference in humans, is additionally that gender roles are kind of a recurring theme throughout this entire series. That there is a difference between men and women. And later in the book, when it kind of throughout the the second and third book, the humanity's discovery of kind of like hibernation technology is a major plot device. Essentially, you can go to a facility, essentially freeze yourself for as much time as you want, and then pop back out. And what happens is that what the author describes these kind of eras of feminized men,
Yeah.
right? where with increased levels of technology, the need for physical violence, the need for physical work goes away, and men essentially become more feminized. And so there are multiple places in which there's a contrast between old and new men, right? Where the old men are described as kind of like brooding and bulky and violent compared to their more kind of like effeminate and effete counterparts. And there are multiple points in time in which essentially feminized men cannot rise to the challenges presented by, I guess, like the plot of these books.
Yeah.
And in addition to being kind of like anti-feminization of men, this book is also not particularly kind towards women.
Yeah, as is Chinese tradition.
Right, which is a pretty common, like if you read normal people review these books, that's something that comes up quite a lot.
Yeah, like the book does not apologize for presenting women as being too loving and too trusting. And again, once again, it's never in a mocking way. It's like, yeah, that like your role is to be the mother, and of course, if you're leading the country as a mother, you might get fooled for those who aren't very motherly.
Right, and that's something that I think rings true in this, is that kind of being outside of whatever this kind of like religion of human equality is, you can see truths that kind of everyone knew until yesterday in the West. And it's very refreshing to get a perspective, outside of that kind of like bubble of homogeneity, that there is a place in which, the author's like, well, okay, obviously you need women, women, these instincts are there for a reason, but they're not always useful. It's not like kind of a lot of, and this is, something you can find in, all sorts of modern fiction, where essentially the buried message is that if you just adopt, feminine attitudes towards the world and feminine attitudes towards conflict resolution, well, that's how you win. In this book, in this series, like, you do have to be, kind of ruthless and hard and masculine to win.
Yeah, and it's really cool because at one point when Baizao, the guy, the 21st century admiral who goes forward 200 years, when he takes over the natural selection ship, the female admiral, the officers on the ship who are female, that they're not used to what they call like a real man, like, and some of them get a certain kind of like fatherly respect for this old guy. And again, it's very respectful. It's not like, oh, she's gonna fall in love for like the masculine man. No, it's more of like this generation has no fathers, and this woman sees in this old admiral a father figure who she like instinctively knows to trust and like follow, basically. So it's not all like, muscular man saves the day. It's also like these people are father figures, they're patriarchs, they restore that certain strong spine of society.
All right, so we've officially ended the general themes discussion, right? We're gonna enter the actual like description of the plot now. So you're warned. You should read these books. There's a lot in them, but at this point, we will not care for spoilers, right? So the first book, The Three-Body Problem, essentially takes place in kind of in time periods between the 1960s and kind of the near future, right? So as I said before, it starts off in the Cultural Revolution, and for much of it kind of follows a collection of scientists, right? And the exciting event that sets the whole series off in motion is that this female scientist, right, this femme cell.
Wenji.
That's the other problem, is that I cannot say Chinese names. And
I will try my best.
Remember every single character by their initials because that's easier than saying their Chinese name. Wenji. Right. Nonetheless, right, after she kind of redeems herself from kind of the social pariah status as an academic during the Cultural Revolution, she's essentially stuck at the Chinese version of SETI, right? Which is this radio installation, which is designed to do a combination of essentially like interstellar research and monitoring American satellites. And while she's there, she essentially makes first contact with an alien civilization, right? And the first contact is made when she discovers that, just for fun, essentially by random chance, she blasts radiation at the sun. And this acts as kind of a repeater, right? It expands this signal out to the galaxy.
She happens to fire the signal at the right angle that the sun's radio waves amplify the human radio waves, and it happens to blast many thousands of times louder than it should ordinarily.
Right, exactly. And so a few years later, after the signal has time to travel, it reaches another civilization. Right, the civilization is known as Trisolaris, called Trisolaris because there are three suns.
Yeah, you may not have picked up, but it's actually Alpha Centauri. It's the nearest star system to here.
And so the reason that the three-body problem is so named is that there's this idea, this thought problem in physics, which essentially says that you can predict how one planet will orbit rather a body larger than it. You can kind of predict how it will orbit two different bodies. That's mathematically predictable. But if there are three bodies, it is completely unpredictable. It's effectively random. And so for a planet orbiting around three suns, this means that the temperature and the tides of this planet are completely unpredictable. And so what happens is that when, our shall we say, I guess technically one of the main characters of this first book hears back, she's contacted another character or another creature on this world who is essentially doing the same job she is,
Yeah.
monitoring the sky, looking for other signs of life. And
Yeah.
this alien writes back, and I want to just complete this for the sake of discussion, and basically says, "Don't ever talk to us again. we will kill you. Like my civilization, if we hear from you again, we're going to know where you are, and we will come kill you and take your stuff." Essentially, because their planet is so unpredictable, it is so hostile to life, that their one purpose as a civilization is to find some place where they can have access to, a regular climate and access to, regular, seasons, because their entire civilization is continually reset by these kind of like unpredictable tides. And so what she does, and I just want to finish this, is she has been kind of so thoroughly abused by culture and so thoroughly kind of become so disgusted with humanity that she basically decides, I don't care. I want them to come and wipe out humanity. So that's kind of like the inciting event of the first book.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting, because it does get kind of funny at moments. There are 2 points, maybe 3 points in those early like chapters. We'll say like this is like the first probably it's not really the first third of the book. The layers are interlayered with things happening in the present day, so it kind of goes back and forth. But this is a really cool chapter because the alien in question is kind of like her foil. The alien as an individual is a pacifist, and this is why the alien goes by the name Listener. Shinjo, I forget his name. The author tends to generalize aliens, never really going too much into detail of what they are, who they are, but gives them like these general names. And so this alien's name is named Listener. And Listener, he's a pacifist. He's like the opposite of a femcell, where like he looks at Earth's radio signal that was sent, because the signal that Ye Wenjie sent out was this like video footage of China's beautiful coasts and a bunch of like positive signals and everything. And the alien sees these beautiful trees along the Chinese coast and was like, I don't want that to be destroyed. We had our chance as civilization. We're stuck on this mess. Do we really want to spread this to that? And so in many ways, the Listener is like a liberal, essentially. He's a progressive liberal. He's a pacifist. He doesn't want to invade anyone. Of course, he's working for like a violent fascist government that wants to take your stuff. And so Listener gives the little warning to Ye Wenjie, hey, I don't know where this signal came from. You may not get this for many years, but if you ever respond to us, we'll know how far where you are. We will find you, and we're gonna take. We're from a shitty planet. The specific signal that they sent is like, do not reply, just over and over again, which is an interesting signal. Your first contact signal is basically don't reply. Like, I'm gonna leave you on read. Please stay on read. But yeah, Ye Wenjie, she's a femcell. Her dad got killed by the Chinese government. She hates the government. She hates everyone, which again is surprising this book got published. But essentially this character, Ye Wenjie, is like, no, F this. I want this world to burn. Here's my coordinates. Here's my address. Come and do me dirty, basically.
Well, and it's interesting because a large catalyst and kind of the reason that she has come to hate humanity is her interaction with another character, Mike Evans. Yeah. Mike Evans is the first American we meet. And the best way to describe it is Mike Evans is essentially baby boomer Greta Thunberg. Yes. He's an oil, an heir to an oil fortune. And he has become so disgusted by, the human destruction of the environment that he essentially wishes, the destruction of all life on Earth. And so
only human life, not all life.
Yeah. Sorry. Excuse me. Only human life. And so what happens, and I'm doing this in chronological order, not in kind of like the order of the plot, because we see this kind of like much like a sitcom, like an A plot and a B plot, right? Where you have the present day and the past kind of alternating and informing each other. Is that when this alien civilization receives her second message, when she basically says like, I don't care, come and take it. We're not worth saving. The first thing they do is just immediately they send off a fleet. And what essentially this gives us as a civilization, a 400-year ticking clock, right? It's going to take them 400 years to get here. But what's especially interesting is within a few years of setting off, they basically have this massive technological development. And we won't get into the details because it's both relatively complicated and not something we can summarize. But this is a major theme in the book. And this this magic, this kind of technology they discover is the ability to make essentially incredibly intelligent supercomputers, smaller than an atom, right? Through kind of like the folding of dimensions. And what this enables is it enables them to have essentially instant access to every single thing on Earth, right? This enables them to see what's going on almost anywhere on Earth. It enables them to hear anything. And it especially enables them to essentially put a hard cap on human technological advancement, right? The thought is, well, we don't want humans to develop weapons that can hurt us in the time between us launching our fleet and when we get there. And so what this creates is what I think one of the most interesting aspects of the book, which is the idea that technological development has an end. There's essentially a maximum cap we can reach. And so much of the drama of the first book is kind of revealing the situation in which humanity has essentially a 400-year doomsday clock and has no ability to develop technologically. So do you have anything to add to that, Luthemplaer?
Yeah. You mentioned it a little bit, but like they launched the fleet first, realize, by the time the ships get there, Earth might be more advanced than us. Well, we might have just accidentally sent our best fleet to their doom. And then this like pipsqueak scientist on the alien world's like, not to worry, my like research project is in blowing up protons, and I think we can make a computer out of one of the protons. And essentially, like the precepts, the governor general of some random territory of this alien world, it's always very vague when it comes to the aliens. It's like, well, let's do it. Let's see what happens. And they eventually, invent the sophon. And because the sophon is only the mass of a proton, it can actually travel at the speed of light. Whereas the ships that are so massive, they can only travel at 1% the speed of light. The ships that launch can only travel about 1%. Well, officially they can get to 10% the speed of light, but they can only accelerate 1% the speed of light or something like that. And so that it'll basically take them 400 years to get to Earth from a star system that's 4 light years away. However, the sophons, as they're called, from the Greek "no," sophon to the wisdom. So a proton, a sophon, it's a wise proton. Funny word. But those things can travel at the speed of light due to their small mass, and thus they'll reach Earth in 4 years. And so from essentially 4 years after the launch of the fleet, they can use these things to harass humanity and freeze up and corrupt scientific data at the microscopic scale. And of course, add in a little black magic, they're quantum entangled with the sophon, with a matching sophon on Solaris, so they can have faster than light technology communication, which may or may not be scientifically accurate, but whatever. At the time of the writing, I thought it was like, this is how we do FTL communications. And so essentially the sophons arrive at Earth 4 years after the launch of the fleet, and they just start harassing scientists and corrupting their data and like convincing scientists to kill themselves, essentially, to find some way to stall human science.
Well, in addition, what this also enables, the Trisolaran civilization to do is essentially foment a, kind of a traitor organization within Earth society. And this is headed up by Femcell and Mike Evans, our Greta Thunberg stand-in.
Yeah.
And what they essentially do is, and this is another interesting kind of critique of society, is they gather together this group of, essentially extremely upper class, high achieving malcontents, who for a variety of reasons essentially hate humans. They hate human life, either for environmental reasons, or they've become so disgusted with, kind of like the hoi polloi that they have essentially, they have made the deal to end all life, end all human life, to prepare for kind of this, this alien civilization. And what's especially interesting is that what we see is that this kind of doomsday prophecy has become, in many of these people, essentially a religious conviction.
Yeah, they start calling the aliens the Lord and everything.
Right, exactly. That they have essentially turned this into a stand-in religion. And when I was talking to you about these books, because it took me a while to get through all three, because they are quite large, and there's 3 of them. I kind of said at multiple points, this book is simultaneously, based in cringe in equal parts. And the way that this book relates to religion is one of those examples, right? Which it has kind of like the obligatory, Chinese materialist atheist attitude towards religion. But at the same time, it does kind of get the idea that like these kind of like doomsday cult, this kind of like praising of the outside, this kind of like religion of the outsider is kind of like endemic to upper class liberals.
Yeah, and this is something because you kind of get the vibes that ETO, as they're known, the Earth Trisolarian Organization, they're basically progressives. They're like environmentalists. They're top-notch scientists who don't like the plebs. They're like the Carl Schwab. What's the guy's name?
Yeah, Carl Schwab. No, Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab. Like everything we hate as like everything we hate on our side of the alley. And essentially, this is like the aliens provide a kind of like tangible god to these progressives that like, oh, this is how we progress. What's the ultimate end of progressivity or whatever you want to call it? It's the end of man, really. It's the end of biological man. And so they have different factions. Some of them think that humanity, what's left of them, like the best of humanity, might find a place in Trisolarian society. And then most of them are like, nah, humanity should be wiped out. Our world we don't deserve the world. Let the Trisolarians have Earth, and we'll go extinct willingly. The willing. It's a very antinatalist organization,
right? And so essentially, the story of the first book, really, in many ways, is kind of setting in motion the plot that will be continued, through the second and third.
Yeah,
and
sorry,
it's
just
necessary. Sorry, carry on, man.
I was just going to tie off the third book. The story ends with humanity discovering the ETO and thereby discovering the invasion. So humanity does not learn about the Trisolarians first. They learn about ETO first. The ETO is running this weird VR game that's recruiting like recluse and anti-natalist people. Like, why this organization with a giant boat recruiting these like progressives across the world? Why are scientists killing themselves after coming into contact with them? And essentially, like the UN's like, oh, we gotta figure out what these guys are up to do. Like, what's going on here? And then after having taken over their headquarters, the UN discovers this communication log between the ETO and something known as the Lord, and they discovered that the Lord is actually an alien race that's been contacting them. And at the end of the book, the Sophons essentially reveal themselves to a UN conference meeting, because the Sophons have the ability to project text into the world. So essentially, they're like they're not only little smart computers, they can like kind of present text by means of like unfolding their substrates or whatever and displaying a text. And so at a UN meeting, the Sophons reveal themselves because now Earth knows about Trisolaris, and essentially just sends them a single message: "You're bugs." They just called humanity bugs, and then disappears. And with that, humanity is aware that there is an intelligence out there coming to get them. The logs show that they have about 400 years. And then, Q book 2, what are we going to do to stop them?
Right. And I should also say that the climactic event is kind of like a strike on the main ETO vessel where Boomer Greta Thunberg is killed, and it is revealed that Femcell is kind of the leading like operator of the Earth Trisolaris organization.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of pivot to the next book, where kind of humanity is thrown into chaos, basically they've been given this ticking clock. And a common theme in all of these is that there is the main character of the next book is kind of introduced in the one before it. And so essentially there's a minor character introduced in the second one who basically has a conversation with Femcell about, kind of like what he is going to do with his life. And from this conversation, he develops what is called, and what is the exact term? Is it interstellar sociology?
Cosmic sociology.
Cosmic sociology, right? This essentially like useless academic, who describes himself as he doesn't particularly care. All he does is, hook up with women and do the bare minimum not to get fired. It is because of his because of his, pioneering work in this field of interstellar sociology, is kind of an integral part of humanity's plan to kind of counter, this extraterrestrial force with essentially unlimited knowledge of what humans are doing. And so could you introduce kind of like the main plot device of the second book, which is, humanity's big gamut to essentially get around, this ever present, kind of like Sophon.
Yeah.
You know,
Whereas the first book, a theme was like sympathy for the devil, where you kind of develop a sympathy for the Trisolarans because of the world that they grew up in, and oh, woe is me. The second book is, yeah, but they are devils and they are out to kill you. And Luoji, the main character, he has a conversation with Wenjie at some point in time after the death of Wenjie's daughter. So Wenjie's daughter was one of the scientists killed by the Trisolarans through driving them insane with these tiny invisible machines that tell you to kill yourself. Sorry, Susan, if that's but so in the second book, Luoji is kind of trying to figure out these axioms that Wenjie told him. Like the first one is like, there's I forget what the axioms are exactly, but there's something like civilization grows, but there's not infinite matter. So eventually, like there's a need to survive, but limited matter at a large enough scale. And so this will eventually produce a conflict between interstellar species. But the conflict takes place over eons, whereas war on a planet might take over a few years. Communication, the speed of light being limited, means that war takes place over the course of centuries in space, which means that the governments and powers and cultures that go to war at the start of a conflict may very well all go extinct by the end of a conflict, and people might just not know why they're fighting anymore. And so there's this idea of how do you fight a war across multiple generations, across eons of space and time? Is it even worth it? And is there an easier solution? Maybe it's easier just to nuke the planet than to deal with people. Like you said, Luoji, he's this useless academic, but for some reason ETO wants to kill him. And the UN is like, why does this organization in contact with aliens keep killing this guy, trying to kill this guy? What he's just this dumbass academic with no future. Why do they want to kill him? And so the UN kind of creates this project called the Wall Facer Project, based off of a Chinese philosophy where you stare at a wall in total silence and produce a world in your mind that no one else knows. It's an ancient philosophical meditation technique. And the idea is, well, we're going to take these individuals, we're going to give them all the resources that we can, and they are sworn to silence for the rest of their lives as to what their plans are. Because although the Sophons can read human technology and disrupt things, they can't read a human mind. And so as long as it's in your mind, it's secret to the Trisolarans. And so you're going.
And so the idea is essentially that, kind of like in the Roman tradition, right? We've been presented with a time of crisis. And so the traditional democratic methods of, voting, creating a committee, well, those no longer apply. And while there is throughout the book kind of irritatingly a lot of conflict between, these kind of like super governmental organizations like the UN and our wall facers, who are essentially dictators, they've been given, essentially unlimited power. The idea is essentially, well, all right, like our enemies, anything we write down, anything that we transmit digitally, they can read, no matter where it is. So what we've got to do is essentially, well, we've got to put it all where they can't read it, which is in someone's head. And so 4 wall facers are created. Shortly afterwards, we hear that the remnants of the ETO, this organization that has been shattered, well, they've decided to create their own plan. And well, essentially this plan is called the Wall Breaker Project. And they set up one guy whose job it is to find out the plan. And the argument is essentially that, well, if I can guess their plan as a regular guy, then obviously, the Trisolarans can guess it, and everything you've done is pointless.
Well, also, the Trisolarans, of course, being a different biology, may not understand some of the intuitions of human reasoning. And so the argument is, well, if Trisolaris puts a human to try and figure out the human plan, it's more likely to succeed than an alien brain trying to figure out a completely alien mind. I kind of missed the point of the last thing. One of the reasons why the Wall Facer Project was set up is because the UN doesn't know why the Trisolarians want to kill Luoji, and so we'll just give him all the resources that they can get and see if he is an idea that would justify why the aliens want to kill him. And whatever reason Luoji's a target, the Trisolarians won't even tell the ETO. So as far as humanity knows, both the ETO and the UN, Luoji's got something in his mind that they don't even like the Trisolarians don't even want ETO to know what it is. It's that secretive. What is it? Who knows? But like the Trisolarians tell the ETO, don't even bother with Luoji. We're monitoring him on our own.
Right. And that's an interesting idea, right? That like, well, we don't know why this guy is important, but the people who, the beings who called us bugs. And this is kind of a recurring theme that for, the Trisolarians, right? These aliens, humanity is so beneath them that they consider them insects, right? They're not even worth taking seriously. And so the moment that they actually find someone that scares them, that they need to take care of, they're trying to arrange his death. Understandably, everyone's like, oh, that guy must be important. Now, we don't know why he's important. So logic essentially goes, well, if they're scared of him, we might as well give him everything we've got.
Yeah.
And what's especially interesting is that this main character kind of, at least in this book, for the first part of it, keeps his slacker nature. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He's not a good person.
Oh, well, also he doesn't know either.
Yeah, he has no idea. And so he's like, okay, here's my plan. Give me a salary, not like a super exorbitant one, but like a pretty high salary. Buy me a mansion and just find me a really attractive girlfriend. And that's my plan. And they're like, well, that is your plan. We're going to do it. And so it essentially takes them around 5 years to figure out that, wait a minute, this wasn't his real plan. He just wanted us to leave him alone and give him everything he wanted anyway. Yeah, which is a little bit amusing.
Luoji is in as much as in the first book, Wenjie is a stand-in for the incel character. I would argue Luoji is the stand-in for the stockbro characters. Like, oh, I won the lottery, I'm just gonna go and get my treadwife and live in the woods.
And it's full of these kind of like amusing interactions where there's, this idea is like, well, you can never question them because if you make them explain it, the cat's out of the bag. And there are multiple situations where, to kind of more and more absurd levels, someone will ask him, why are you doing that? He's like, that's part of the plan.
Yeah.
Like,
let's talk about that for a second.
You need to buy this extremely expensive bottle of wine for me. I'm like, why? I mean, it's part of the plan. And the idea is it does get ridiculous. And what happens over the course of these few years, and there are 4 wall facers. So there's one who is, and then they're all kind of representations of different civilizations.
Yeah. And that's important to say. Like each wall facer is the manifestation of their civilization. So I wrote them down in what I sent you earlier. Let me fetch them. I can do a quick summary of them.
So the first one is another stand-in American, this guy named Frederick Tyler, who essentially is kind of like a stand-in for a neocon.
Yeah.
And so he develops kind of a series of hyper militaristic plans. And it's funny if in our personal interactions,
Go on.
I sent you a very funny text, which is, wait a minute, is he talking to Osama bin Laden? Because essentially this guy runs out of ideas and is like, well, I need to make people fight. I need to make people do something hopeless, right? Fight this, interstellar civilization. Well, who's good at that? The guy who started the Taliban, he probably knows how to do this. So he does end up speaking to the Taliban. And relatively quickly, his wall breaker figures out his plan. And this causes him to go into a spiral. He basically can't handle the fact that, he, the best and the brightest, one of these kind of like extremely capable, very credentialed members of kind of like I don't know how you would say it, like the neocon class.
Well, these are the managerial elite.
Exactly. And so he, after a conversation with Luoji, he kills himself.
Yeah, he can't deal with it. He can't handle the fact that there isn't a managerial solution to this problem.
Right. And so our second wall breaker I believe he's a fictional leader of Venezuela. His name is Manuel Rey Diaz.
Yeah.
And he's kind of the stand-in for like this kind of like third world strongman type, right? He successfully fought off, an American invasion, and he has his own plan, which essentially involves, which is kind of the solution that I was mentally running with, which is, well, all right, we'll create a Cold War II scenario. Right? We'll create mutually assured destruction. Well, if you do that, we'll essentially create an explosion so big it will damage the Earth, right? If we can't have it, no one can. And again, he ends up essentially, when this is revealed, instead of killing himself when his plan is found out, because to be honest, his plan probably would have worked. It is so abhorrent to the UN, to kind of these supranational agencies, that he's essentially kicked out of society, and just normal people mob him and stone him to death.
He's color revolution.
Right, exactly. Because what was needed to, at least achieve some degree of success was so abhorrent, humanity couldn't take it.
Yeah, and that's a thing where like the ideas might be right, but the time period for them isn't.
Right, exactly. That to quote an oft-used line, that people can't handle the truth. They can't do the things they need to do to survive. And so,
yeah, I would argue Ray Diaz's solution is probably the closest to the ultimate solution that works, but it wasn't tolerable. The idea of like mutually assured destruction doesn't work very well with the contemporary neo-progressive, like progressive liberal neocon. It might work with the neocons in part because they kind of invented the solution, but mutually assured destruction is not really tolerable to a progressive worldview where everybody can be fair and reasonable. Democracy can be pushed on everybody, and they'll go for it.
And so right after the death of Diaz, right, essentially Luoji's gamut is called. Everyone realizes that, wait a minute, his plan to just hang out with his hot wife in a cottage in the Swiss Alps is not actually a plan to save the world. And what they do is they basically are like, all right, we are kidnapping your wife and child. We are not letting you see them. We are not letting you have a normal life. We are forcing you to do this.
Yeah.
And so essentially this puts our character into crisis, because he quite literally has no idea what to do. And there's an interesting series of interactions between our main character, who is this kind of like purposeless academic, and a police officer we meet in the first half. Dashur is, I think, generally how you say his name, who's kind of he's a very interesting character, but he's essentially a uneducated, grizzled police detective. It's described that he's been put on suspension multiple times for police brutality. He's got a very jaded view of the world. And so essentially our main character has absolutely no idea what to do. And this is kind of contrasted with another, the last wall facer, which is a British neuroscientist whose name is Bill Hines. So do you want to describe his kind of tack towards this, this like ticking clock, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, he has an interesting solution. Just AI the problem away, and so he wants to build. He thinks that if we can't break the Sophon lock, maybe the human brain can. Instead of our technology, maybe the brain can be jump started to like see in a deeper way that we can't currently see. If you could directly see the Sophons, you would know what they're influencing, right? If your eyes are precise enough to see the Sophons, you would know what data is right and what data is corrupted, because you could see them working. So his idea is to somehow jumpstart human evolution to advance our biology beyond the Sophons, and this eventually ends up him seeking like what we now know as a neural net, like the AI art bots. He basically does like I think this is many years before AI art bots existed, but he basically has that solution: build a neural net like organization, computer hardware network that will essentially tackle the Sophon issue for us, many multitude times more advanced than the human brain, and maybe you can eventually do that genetically with future technology. And so he and his wife, go on.
Sorry. And so why this is so interesting is because essentially what this Chinese author does is pose a problem and basically say like, all right, the different ruling castes of current society, right? The neocons, the transhumanists, and like third world dictator type strongmen. None of them have adequate solution to this problem. They cannot figure it out. And so it's interesting because in many ways it's kind of analogous to our current situation,
Yeah.
right? Where we have kind of created a problem where technology seems to be slowing down, and none of the kind of like the three traditional 20th century ruling strategies seem up to the task.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly interesting.
I'd like to quote I quoted John Michael Greer occasionally. He's the druid I like to read sometimes, up in Connecticut, and he has this quote, come visit the grave come visit the grave Nietzsche dug for God. You might hear the grave diggers burying progress too. And it's a great line, and essentially like because the 20th century built progress as their new god. If that god fails, they're gonna go fucking nuts. They can't find anything else. They're completely crippled without their god. And so by robbing the 20th century cults of their god, he exposes them as like madmen. They're all madmen with no solutions to the problem.
Right, because in many ways we've kind of bet everything on the idea that, oh well, technology will smooth it over.
Yeah.
Technology will provide that X factor. And the problem is that, in this case, it's an explicit outside force. But as you've mentioned, no one's really explored the idea of, well, what if we figured out everything there is to know?
Yeah, and this is actually, I wanted to mention it. One of the things or questions that led me to read this book was this like thought experiment I had a few years ago, where I was like, hi, my mom, she loves Star Trek. And she'd always talk about how, oh yeah, all the inventions in Star Trek are coming true. The tricorders, the cell phone, the computers, or the laptops, all that stuff's coming true. And I started realizing, if you go back to like 1800 or like War of the Worlds era literature, they had a few inventions like spaceships and terraforming, and we kind of figured those things out to some extent into the 20th century. So like 19th century literature proposes inventions, 20th century solves it. 20th century Star Trek proposes inventions, 21st century solves it. That doesn't really hold true for my generation. There aren't a lot of new inventions in sci-fi being offered. Like the distance between sci-fi and actual technology feels a lot shorter than if I was reading War of the Worlds in the year 1900. And essentially the rate of theorizing new ideas seems to be slowing down a lot compared to what we're actually inventing, to the extent that I'm kind of convinced that within my lifetime we will discover everything. Like, I can't think of any things where there might be new discoveries, maybe the Higgs field or things like that, but I'm kind of convinced I'm going to live to see the end of science at this point in my life.
So this is an interesting idea, because I do want to address that, and also I'm happy to do a part 2 with you on this series, because legitimately there's a lot to discuss here, and we do need to cover the groundwork so people can at least understand where we're coming from, right? And so the only reason I want to say this is because the only main character in this entire series that I actually like is Loji, because he essentially is kind of the one person who we follow that actually kind of like sees the situation for what it is. And what eventually happens is that this technology of hibernation, which appears multiple times, starts to pass more and more time in kind of the world, where our characters kind of sleep through it. And what happens is that basically Luigi has actually spent almost no money compared to everyone else. All the other wall facers have devised these grand schemes that involve trillions of dollars, and he hasn't really done anything at all. But what he has done is he's basically what he says, and this is not explained at the time, is he says, I have cast a spell.
Yeah.
and what he does is send coordinates to essentially an empty star out in the middle of nowhere, and he bounces it off the sun, much like Femcell bounced coordinates or bounced information off the sun in the first one. And what is basically calculated is that it will take 50 years for the information that those coordinates to a barren sun, a couple light years away, will take, roughly 50 years to go off into the ether. And so what he does is he enters hibernation as the last time as our one other remaining wall facer also enters hibernation to wait for his essentially neural computer to develop.
So let's take a point to say the first half of the second book is essentially all the wall facers testing their ideas, and then they kind of all come to the conclusion we have to sleep for technology to catch up. What little room for advancing technologies left with the Sophons, we need those last little oomphes to get our ideas across. And so the two leftover wall facers, Luoji and Heinz, they decide to sleep for a few decades into the future, or actually a century, right? They end up going a lot longer than they meant, right? You can go on that.
Well, right. And so this brings us to our first major time skip. And to me, this is in many ways something I find particularly interesting because it basically chronicles what would human society do. What does the author think that humanity's societies would do? Which brings us to another major theme in this, which is called the ravine. And so what happens in the second book is essentially human civilization as a whole is put on a war footing, right? The idea is that we have this 400-year ticking clock, that it's getting closer and closer to the day in which this, insurmountable foe arrives and kills us all. So they make the logical choice of essentially devoting their entire economy to this. And in the intervening time, while our main characters are essentially asleep, there's kind of a miniature civilizational collapse, right? There's a massive famine. The human population shrinks dramatically. But by the time our main characters wake up, we've essentially achieved the Star Trek future. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Human material want has essentially been satisfied. Everyone lives in essentially, automated gay space communism underground, right? And everything seems to be working well. But this doesn't last. Right?
There is a very big hint when they wake up that it's not what it all seems. Well, a few hints. The first is that the Ding Yi, one of the secondary characters who wakes up, a scientist, he realizes that even though he's like 100 years in the future, he's like an astrophysicist professor, and he realizes everything he was teaching in the 21st century is still the current curriculum. And he's like, that's a little sussy. Like
that's the dumbest way to describe that, but you're not wrong.
Yeah.
And essentially what's happened is that in the intervening time, the aliens were right. Technology has not advanced. All we have done is essentially, to a smaller and smaller degree, kind of optimized what tech we already discovered. We've gotten slightly better at making electric motors. We've gotten a little bit more efficient. We've gotten a little bit better at making, new Skinner boxes. But materially, we haven't really discovered anything new. And so what eventually happens, right, is that we see, and I want to, wrap up and explain the concept of why the second book, rather, which is my favorite, is called The Dark Forest, is that we see the result of this hex, this spell, quote unquote, that our character Luoji sent off into space. And everyone laughs at him. When he comes back, he's not anything special. The Wall Facer project is viewed as some like crazy Cold War thing now.
Yeah.
It's viewed as like, something we overreacted, because essentially everyone has decided, well, it's not worth sacrificing our quality of life. We saw what that did. That created this massive famine. So you know what? Let's just relax. We've advanced. We're probably fine. We've built up this fleet that we're sure can take on the Trisolar.
Yeah. And again, this is, we mentioned it before the show, but this is essentially Dunning-Kruger effect plotted onto the Star Trek future, where because humanity hasn't found anything new, they just kind of assumed, we must have just like the Sophon lock, as they call it, must not have been as effective as they thought, right? We must have solved all the problems. We have spaceships now. We have lasers. We have all the crazy cool stuff. Whatever. We can deal with the aliens now.
Right. What can they do against us? But there are several complicating factors. So first, the Trisolarans have launched another fleet. And
not yet. No.
Oh, it hasn't happened yet. Sorry, it's been a while since I've read this.
Yeah, no, they launch a probe.
Thank you for that. They launch a probe, right? Which is this tiny object, right? This minuscule, I think it's described as the size of a truck, right? The size of a semi. And it's coming to Earth very, very quickly. And so, well, civilization essentially sends out its entire fleet to intercept
most of it. Yeah,
right, almost 98% of it. Because no one can agree. Everyone, if our victory is so assured that everyone wants to be a part of it, we don't want anyone to be left out of this.
Yeah. It's the utopia where every battleship gets a chance to shoot the enemy craft to prove their worth, right? So they arrange their entire the three major fleets, the North American fleet, the European fleet, the Asian Pacific fleet, arrange themselves in this like vertical grid formation around the probe as it arrives in the solar system. And the idea is that they're going to try and see if it's a messenger of peace. Oh, maybe the Tricelarians see we're advanced. Now we can be friends because we're at an equal footing. Or if it's some kind of weapon, we'll just blow it up and give them a good show for their money. And so the fleet essentially approaches very close quarters in a vertical grid, and sends out Ding Yi, the scientist I mentioned before, who by the way is in the prequel before the trilogy. Ding Yi, who's like really like, this ain't gonna end well for us. He's a real cynic, and so he advises as many ships as he can in the fleet. Listen, get yourself ready to get the fuck out of here if anything goes wrong. Like, be ready to just hit the gas or the pedal, get out. And his advice, essentially, like a few ships put themselves in what's known as a deep sea state, which is like they have to put the crew under high pressure hibernation to accelerate, otherwise they'll kill everyone. Like the acceleration fluid, like in a deep sea ocean state. And so Ding Yi and his little crew goes to evaluate the probe, and they discover it's a seamless droplet, like a water droplet, perfectly reflective, and seems to be at like 0 Kelvin, like absolute zero. And Ding Yi kind of quickly realizes this is the product of technology we do not have access to. And so he's kind of like, he's an old man. He's like, I'm gonna die one day anyway. Whatever. I'll do this thing for you, but I got a bad feeling about this. And as he gets the molecular scanners onto the probe, he starts realizing he can't see any chemistry of it. It's a solid surface where the neutrons of whatever it's made of are so tightly packed you can't even see the distances between atomic nuclei. And he instantly realizes this thing is
we're over.
We're dead. We're dead.
We're not. What proceeds to happen is that this massive, Spanish Armada like fleet, the entire might of humanity, with essentially 3 exceptions, is destroyed in a matter of hours, just completely obliterated, almost to a man.
The ship turns out to be made of what's known as a strong force, which is like a known physical thing that we don't yet know how to explain. The strong force is what holds atoms together. It's 100 times stronger than any chemical force, I think, or something like that. And so this little probe, because it has sophons, it knows where every ship is, it knows where all of their fusion cores are, and it proceeds to essentially ram all of the ships through their fusion core, blowing them all up in like a giant, like 1x1 domino explosion.
Right. And so essentially what happens is with a few notable exceptions, because there are essentially 2 groups of ships that manage to escape.
Yeah, they listen to Ding Yi. They listen to Ding Yi.
Right, and they escape. And what's interesting is after that, this probe essentially disappears again. We cannot find it. And so these 2 different groups of ships essentially head off into deep space. The idea is they are going to just get out. They'll leave and never come back. But
go on. Sorry.
What's especially interesting is that we're kind of treated to this dilemma, between, the ship's crew, where everyone has kind of realized that no one out of these 2 different groups of ships, I think there's 3 in one and 2 in the other, are going to make it with 3 different ships. They're all going to need all of the resources.
Yeah.
They can't make it. And there's this kind of like diabolical game theory situation where everyone doesn't want to wipe anyone out, but they all know they need to. And what's essentially called, I believe, what is the term they call it in the book?
The Battle of Darkness.
the Battle of Darkness, where essentially we see how humanity acts in kind of like ultimate desperation, right? Outside of Earth itself. And the answer to that is pure rational, like pure cold-hearted murder, right? You have to
Yeah.
kill to survive. And so what happens is both of these groups realize the exact same thing and turn on each other almost instantaneously. Once they're outside of certain.
Once they're beyond the return, like once they realize there's not enough fuel to go back, and there's not enough fuel to go anywhere, and they're kind of stuck, they realize that it's in this cosmos, it's kill or be killed, even against your own. Some have to die so all can live. Sort of.
And so this is a theme that comes out through the book, right? The kind of like, and this is the sociology of space. And we're coming up on, kind of the end of the show.
Yeah.
And I want you guys to come back. I want you guys to read this book because it's well worth your time. And I want to reveal next time, how this ties into how Luoji, our main character of the second book, essentially cracks the problem, how he figures it out.
Do we want to mention what happens at this point? Well, he's like waking up after the darkness battle is happening, or do we want to say it for next time?
Do you think that's giving away too much? You can if you want.
I think saying no. It's well, we'll say it this much. Luoji he never wakes up from the time he asked. They kind of forgot about him. And so he actually ends up sleeping not for like 50 years for the time for his spell to get to the other solar system. He ends up sleeping for like a century, basically, like a lot more longer than he thought. And of course, his wife and children are also hibernating. And the UN just forgets about him. And when he wakes up, they only wake him up because of the battle, both the battle with the droplet and the battle of darkness that precedes, where Earth once again is in this state of panic. The Dunning-Kruger effect. We were not as good as we thought. We are fucked. How do we fix this?
The massive fleet we built to defend humanity was destroyed by a probe, by a single probe.
Not even a ship.
And they launched more than one. I believe there are 11 of them.
Yeah.
And so essentially we are right back where we started. We have wasted 100 years of time.
200 years.
200 years, right. 200 years of time. We're halfway there. And we are right back where we started.
Yeah.
And so that's where our main character is essentially brought back. So, basically we've gone back to square one. And if you want to hear how this is resolved, come back for next time, because I want to talk about this book. In addition to just being an interesting story, has a lot to say about, like we've said before, about the relationship between men and women, the relationship between cultures, and human nature. Right? I consider it the only good sci-fi book written after the Cold War. So that gets a full kind of, I guess, recommend from me.
I'll only say this much: his spell works, but we're not going to reveal how it worked until next time.
Well, fair enough. So we have some super chats that I want to get through.
Yeah.
Falling outside the normal moral constraints. We need a Dan Simmons Hyperion Canto stream. That sounds interesting. I'll look into that. Also, an Ian M. Banks Culture series stream. I'd be up for that. Restoring Order, Patrick Casey, whose show I will be appearing on soon. You guys should check us out. I believe that will be the 17th. Good discussion. Read any Gene Wolfe? I've owned Shadow of the Torture for a while, but I haven't read it. I actually have read Gene Wolfe, and I actually talked about it last night in my conversation with actually I think it was Monday with my conversation with Lambda. That's a book that's incredibly influential on me. I would recommend reading Gene Wolfe. He has a very different take on sci-fi. It is really only technically sci-fi. It is kind of a story of a humanity who has fallen so far that they don't understand the world that they inhabit anymore. They're so different from kind of humanity at their peak that they essentially have returned to a world of magic. And I think that's quite interesting. It's worth your time. It's kind of, feudalism in space, but in not a gay way. So Gene Wolfe is honestly, I hate to say it, Gene Wolfe is probably my favorite science fiction writer. And then Corbin just sends $5, very kind. Smear for $5 Australian. Back in systems engineering, we studied some theoretical Chinese fire escape plans. The bugmen literally use false exits to decongest real exits. Jeez, that's grim. Wow. I will say, and I don't mean to to be too punitive about this, but I did come out of this book with both a respect and a disdain for Chinese culture.
Yeah.
It's like-
There's a lot of the Bugman ride again in this book.
yeah, 100%. Where it's like it's interesting because it's not like a lot of modern fiction where it's like, Chinese culture is like American culture with wontons. It's like, oh no, these are different types of people, and they do some things right, and you could not pay me to be Chinese. I'll put it that way. All right, Luthemplaer, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
Mildly ill at slowly counterbalancing with toxification of alcohol.
See, that's the cure, right? Is that you just have to balance out with other substances, until you achieve like a golden meat. So it's like an upper, a downer, and then you just kind of like average yourself out, right?
I like to call it D-maxing, the way John D does his bourbon every show with AA.
All right, I thought you were going somewhere else with that, but you know what? I approve of that. I also say I can't say that much because I think I probably have a finger of bourbon in basically every episode, which isn't a problem if you're doing it for work, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, enough about that. This is actually for everyone at home. This is a part 2 of a show we did about a week ago, and because it's a part 2, I do recommend obviously you guys watch that episode first. There are some things that won't make sense. We're gonna do a recap, but obviously we're gonna assume, for the sake of discussion, that you're on the same page as we are. And also, this is specifically about a book. This is a series rather written by a Chinese author. The Three-Body Problem, Dark Forest, and what's the name of the full series again, Luthemplaer, as one piece?
It goes by many names, but it's officially known as the Remembrance of Earth's Past.
Right, and so obviously, if you haven't read this, first one, you should, because it's quite good. It's worth your time, but you're going to miss out on some things, and you should accept that if you go forward, right? And yes, falling outside the normal world constraints, this is live. Anyway, so I'll give us kind of a Flash Gordon recap of what happened in the first book and partially through the second, which is where we were when we ended our conversation. So in the first book, we basically hear the story of first contact, right? Where Earth civilization contacts an alien civilization known by Trisolaris, so called because they live in a solar system with 3 suns. And the 3 suns have such an unpredictable orbit that the planet where the Trisolarans live, it basically is extremely hostile to life. There is no predictable season. So there are chaotic eras where the temperature vacillates wildly, and stable eras where it's, some semblance of normal. And so this has meant that the society is essentially desperate to get out and looking for someplace else. And our main character in the first book, who's kind of this boomer shitlib, is so horrified by the environmental degradation and so horrified with human nature that when she hears from this, alien civilization, the first thing she hears back is essentially from another pacifist who basically says, "Don't ever respond, because if we hear from you again, we're going to come kill you. We need your planet." And she, in kind of like this fit of nihilism, basically says like, "All right, you can have it." And so what that means is that there is a 400-year countdown timer to when this advanced alien species arrives on Earth. And that's kind of the backdrop that the plot is set up against. And so in the modern day, the UN basically decides that we need to counter this alien threat coming in 400 years. And because these aliens are so advanced, and we won't get into exactly how in this short summary, they've basically put a hard cap on human technology. They have, kind of cracked quantum computing. And so they've developed these, dimensional supercomputers, right? Supercomputers, which are folded up into be, smaller than an atom. And they can be essentially almost anywhere at once, relaying information back to the Trisolarans within an instant. And so this means that, any information that is written down, any information that is digital, they have access to. And also, they have put a hard cap on human progress. So you can't innovate yourself out of this. And so the UN decides to create what they call the Wall Facer Project, which essentially is a dictatorship where 4 people are given the ability to do whatever they want, as long as they keep their plan, their great plan, entirely in their own head. And so this brings us to the second book where our character Luoji initially just blew everything off and said, all right, my plan is to go live in the mountains with a super hot girl. That's my plan. Eventually they decide, no, you're not allowed to do that because the first 2 wall facers have been killed. Their plans didn't work. And it is interesting because out of all of the wall facers, the only one that the Trisolarians seem to be scared of is Luoji, which is odd because at this point he's seen as largely useless.
And so fear the drunkard.
Right. And so we've essentially got to the point where Luoji has made his only real demand, which is that he is cast what he calls a spell. And so in this world, the same way that our main character in the first book, who made contact with Trisolaris, and Luoji, the way they operated, his spell is the same. They've essentially used the sun as a giant antenna to amplify information. And so what Luoji did is he transmitted coordinates of a barren planet, or a barren star, rather, out into the universe, an omnidirectional signal. And after that, he entered into hibernation. And so that's where we left off last time. Luthemplaer, is there anything you want to add to that summary?
Yeah, I think one thing in the first book that we may have skipped a bit is I think the first book does a good job of giving you sympathy for the devil, if you will. By the end of the first book, I did genuinely feel bad for the aliens. and I was like, well, I mean, we should probably find something place for them to go take a hike to. But in the second book, you kind of like realize the levels that these aliens are willing to go to get out of their prison planet, essentially. And so like there's still a bit of a mystery where we left off of like why are the aliens afraid of the guy that's doing nothing versus the other like wall facers who are trying their best to figure out ideas, and some of these ideas as it's revealed are suicidal, and yet even though some of these ideas risk destroying the very planet that the Trisolarians want to take, for some reason or another the aliens never really give a damn. Or at least they feel confident they can countermeasure it. And so what is this spell? We don't learn about the spell initially in the second book. First we see like the real first contact physical when a probe arrives from the Trisolarians. This is a probe that was sent faster than the main invasion fleet. There's no one on the probe. It's just a first contact probe. The humans are thinking maybe this is they're going to sue for peace because we've gotten advanced now. But throughout the second book, it's kind of hinted that this is a delusion of humanity. The first major hint we get is one of the main characters who are being brought back from hibernation, which is a technology we mentioned last show. Just a side note, like hibernation is being used to allow people to do generational planning against aliens. One of the generational planners, this physicist, he finds out in 200 years in the future, he can still teach physics, and he kind of gets the hunch we're not as advanced as we think. If I can still teach kids the same physics from 200 years ago, we're fooling ourselves. And so he kind of gives a warning to some of the ships in the first contact scenario. Listen, something's up. Get ready to get the heck out of here. Get out of Dodge the second anything goes wrong. And when we leave off, right before the spell is talked about in the second book, we see several ships that listened to this physicist are now escaping the solar system in like full speed reverse, basically. The probe turned out to be what's known as strong matter, which is a really cool science fiction topic, just from a science fiction perspective. To briefly mention what that is, all matter is all atoms are held together by a strong force which we have not yet figured out how to release from the nuclei of an atom. If you could bind atoms together into a macro atom, and not a molecule. A molecule is the assembly of atoms into a larger structure. This would be an assembly of, it would be more like expanding the size of the proton, or rather expanding the size of the nuclei, which is a radically different concept. Scientists have been trying to do this in real life for a long time, but the strong force is self-contained, so you can't actually rip it open. And so like the author here makes a really clever idea. Well, the aliens just straight up found a way to like make this unbeatable force of metal that can like turn 30 degrees on a split of a hair and blow up 1,000 ships at high speed.
And so the point is, we have this realization that, and this is important in the context, but I want to give people kind of the big picture while we're doing a summary, that the probe, right, the initial contact which, was viewed as possibly even being a surrender, ultimately destroys the entire human military. And so humanity kind of falls, or is panicking, right? Because their best shot, that their big moment of triumphalism, like, oh, we're gonna accept, the surrender of our foes, it results in essentially the destruction of, their entire, power base, right?
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting note, but like it's due to the scale of defeat that the scientists of Earth are willing to like look at literally any alternatives to their assumed competence. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger graph. They've hit the valley of despair now, and it's at that point where some of them discover this weird like spell that this like 21st century scientists cast on a star, and they're willing to look at mysticism at this point. And turns out that star has been destroyed from that spell. You can talk about that if you want.
Right. So essentially, at this point, Luoji, our main character from the last book, is viewed as like a historical curiosity. The same way we would view like crazy Cold War projects, where they investigated psychics, right? They're viewed as, essentially, completely disgraced. And the spell, quote unquote, because that's all he would refer to it as, is his spell, was a series of coordinates that he, bounced out to the universe at large. And these coordinates led to, a star with nothing around it, just a star that was kind of close enough.
We hope
to be observed. Right. Yeah, we hope. And what happened is when these scientists are essentially reeling, they go back and they're like, wait a minute, wasn't there this crazy guy who had this idea? And what he said before he went into hibernation is keep looking at this star, like just keep an eye on it. And so, of course, they found out which star he was talking about, and they looked back at it, and they found out that it had been destroyed, completely destroyed. And they don't know why. And so they wake up Luoji basically to ask him, like, well, okay, like, why? What was it? And do you want to, why did these coordinates being broadcasted to the universe result in, the complete destruction of this star?
Yeah. Spoiler alert. At this point, we're going to go deep into spoilers that we didn't even cover in part 1. So up to this point, we didn't do the big reveal. But the OG figures, I guess you could say there's always a bigger fish. And
yeah, exactly. Yes.
And he figures if there's a big enough fish that is paranoid and it sees a bunch of coordinates of where a civilization are, it might just decide better safe than sorry. It's aim the shotgun down the hatch, right? Turns out his spell worked. He discovers that somewhere out there's what he calls a hunter civilization, a hunter probe, a hunter alien. It's not known, but this force or alien in the universe saw the coordinates, figured this is a really dumb civilization broadcasting itself to the universe. I don't want competition. I'm going to destroy that star. And using the probes that humanity had, they could see from their telescopes that it wasn't just a natural phenomenon. A high-speed photon of immense density struck the star at light speed and basically supernovaed it. So this was a clear weapon by this unknown hunter. And so essentially what Luoji does that messes up with Tristellaris' plan is, if we can't beat you, we'll find someone who can. and this like becomes known, of course, the book spawned the theory, Dark Forest theory. The idea that given a large enough scale and enough infinite possibilities of the universe, civilizations will typically favor destroying each other before contact out of security concerns. Because you don't know how advanced or primitive another civilization is when you first contact them, and it's essentially always safer to shoot first. You have a very low chance of meeting a friend, and a very high chance of survival if you make that unknown force a corpse first before you know if they're friend or foe. It's a bit of a dark theory, but I also kind of like it a lot because you could argue, well, why have we found any aliens yet? Is it really that the universe, that we're this super special, unique planet in the universe, or that everyone else is smart enough to hide and we're not?
Well, right. And so that's what is brought up, that there's essentially this new form of game theory. And it's essentially revealed that that's why this character Luoji is viewed as dangerous, because he was the first one to realize essentially the game theory of the universe. And it's based on, a couple premises. right? Which is one, life always expands. Two, there is scarcity. And what this means is, especially over, universal time, right? Essentially over billions and billions of years, a large number of species, almost infinite numbers of civilizations have existed and do exist. And all of them are, expanding with limited resources. And because the differences between civilizations are so great, that you can never really communicate with anyone else. So you can never really be sure that anyone is as actually, benevolent. And so you have to, because again, you could be, a very young civilization interacting with an extremely advanced one. You always could be facing someone who can outgun you. And so the play is, like you said, it's always safer to shoot first. And so essentially it means that this is what he calls the dark forest, right? Hence the name of the book. That everyone is in the dark, and everyone has, in the analogy, right? Everyone is both a hunter and hunted, and everyone has to be quiet so they don't reveal their position. But the moment someone does, everyone leans towards them. Everyone turns around, because obviously everyone has the ability to essentially eliminate everyone else, or, reveal them to someone else who could. And so essentially, the moment anyone is known, they're instantly destroyed. And in the case of this curse, they don't even actually know where it came from. It's never revealed who actually destroyed the star. And what this has allowed is this essentially sets up a Cold War style mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
Because the more signals sent out from an area, the easier it is to tell where those signals are coming from.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there's a few extra points there to mention. The reason why this system works is basically the limit of the speed of light. By the time you say hello to anyone, like I wrote a Substack article about this, and you can imagine, due to the time scales, like imagine a Roman emperor says hello to an alien planet. By the time he gets a reply, it'll be Charlemagne. You can't actually trust that the person you say hello to, when they get back to you, is even the same civilization, the same ethics, the same culture. Like, even if they say they're the most, progressive, whatever lollipop country you want, by the time you even reply to them, they may be like some crazy genocidal dictatorship. The time scales are too long for communication. And once you can't communicate, you can only suspect. And this is the other factor of the dark forest, and why it works is what's called the chain of suspicion, where it's just like the chain of suspicion instantly starts once you can't communicate instantly, and it will inevitably lead to someone shooting first for their safety. Simply because, like the Tricelarians showed, when they sent the invasion force, their main concern was if Earth was going to be more advanced when the invasion force arrived in 400 years. Tricelarians knew from the start, like, we're taking a gamble. We may not have this, and eventually they figure that they could invent these, like you said, the dimensional computers to mess with human science. And they basically do every precaution they can to prevent Earth from catching up to them, because they know that even if they invade, by the time that they get to Earth, Earth could be ahead of them. And so that the main tactics of war is not firepower, but rather delaying the building of firepower, which is kind of a cool idea. I think it's like a long form war. But you can go more into the Cold War strategies of what this, what does the once Luoji realizes the spell works, how does he get Tricelaris to stop? Right.
So if I'm not mistaken, what actually is revealed is that the Tricelarans realize at once, that he's right, and so what they do is, and I don't remember exactly how, because it's been, a month and a half since I've read this, but they essentially they put a block. They basically lock out the ability of Earth to broadcast.
Yeah,
because they realize all of a sudden, oh, he knows, because Luoji's plan is basically to say, all right, if you guys come here, I will broadcast 2 pieces of information where your planet is. And in doing that, indirectly, I will reveal where Earth is. Essentially, mutually assured destruction. Both of these places will be wiped out. And basically, he plans to do that the same way that Earth contacted other civilizations the first time by using the sun. And they essentially realize that, freak out, understandably, and freeze their access to do that. Do you remember exactly how they do that?
Yeah, so the probe that destroyed the human fleet, that wasn't its main goal. Its main goal was not to destroy the human fleet. It had to destroy the human fleet to accomplish its main goal, which was to fly straight to the sun and essentially use that strong force I mentioned to expand itself and put out a resonance frequency to shut down anything Earth sends. So this indestructible radio, you can think of it as an indestructible sound canceller, essentially. It flies to the sun, and anytime humanity tries to use the sun to broadcast a signal, because like I mentioned before, the sun can amplify signals, it will just cancel the signal, so Earth can't send any signals out. And so that's essentially the way in which they hold on a second.
That's essentially the way that they turn off Earth's ability to talk to everyone else, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I got cut off.
And so once this is revealed, people kind of start to hate Luoji, like slowly at first, but they basically look at him as having failed, because even though he revealed to humanity the true nature of the universe, he wasn't able to turn that into a real victory, right? Even though he figured it out too late. And it seems at this point, right, the Trisolarans got ahead of him, that they got them. And so what happens is that Luoji basically gets recruited as a scientist working on a Hail Mary project. And this project basically involves, scattering dust, around the solar system to act as kind of like an early warning system. We haven't mentioned it, but at multiple points in this book, the way that humanity has tracked the arrival of this fleet is by watching, their wake, so to speak, and watching them go through dust. And so the logic essentially goes, well, we can create a closer version of that, in our civilization. We'll use it as like a buoy in a harbor to tell, like, oh, are they making a wake? And the Trisolarans basically look at this and like, there's no harm in it. There's nothing to be done. It's not going to stop us coming here. But essentially, and over the course of this, Luoji descends to basically being like a homeless man. He's described as stinking, as, just like spending all of his time on essentially a useless project,
So,
and everyone hates him. Sorry, carry on, man.
No, I was going to say, it's kind of funny because if you actually know a little bit of Eastern meditation techniques, this is wall facer meditation. you like withdraw from the world, you stare at a freaking wall all your life, and you just let your mind run wild. Some of them go drunk and do drugs while doing it, but like you stare at a wall and you like do everything you can to amplify your imagination staring at that wall. And so Luoji essentially is becoming a true wall facer. But of course, like you said, like as far as the Trisolarans are aware, this is just like a man who was too late and now is reduced to this like minuscule task of stupid activities that won't do anything. So like of course he'd go drinking, of course he'd be depressed. He failed, so we can stop bothering with this guy. We won. Of course, it turns out if you want to go into the next step, or have any other thoughts about like this this illusion that Luoji is playing in the role of,
right? Okay. Falling outside the moral constraints for $10. Just sent finishing up book 1 tonight. Read it because of the last stream. Really enjoyed it for the most part. Don't love the end as much. Aliens for Better as a mystery. Got book 2 ready to go. Thanks for the recommendation. Well, I would say out of all of them, and we'll probably finish discussing the series tonight by hook or by crook. The second book is by far my favorite. The second book, this kind of like game theory situation that we've described, is gone into in much greater detail, and it's really an interesting logical puzzle to put yourself in. So 1, thank you for your $10. 2, stop listening to this. And 3, get back to me when you finish it because I want to hear what you think about it. But anyway, right? I realize that's probably terrible for my audience, telling them to leave, but nonetheless, I stand by it. Anyway, and so what's revealed in kind of this flash of brilliance is that what this guy was doing wasn't just some useless project, but what he has done is turned this dust, which he can, and this is not, again, I'm trying to on one hand, give you enough details to understand what's going on, and on the other hand, not weigh you down with useless information. But the way that this project is set up is they have, these kind of like bombs set up that when detonated will just scatter this dust around, just to move it as far away, in over as much distance as possible. But what's revealed is that far from being random, our main character has essentially used the spacing of these to create what is essentially Morse code. So
he basically treats the dust he's scattered across the earth as a tapestry he can write on with nuclear bomb pens.
Right. And so all of a sudden, this means that at the press of a button, he has the ability to transmit to this dark forest, right? This universe full of, people with itchy trigger fingers, the location of Trisolaris and the location of Earth, which means all of a sudden he has achieved, despite the fact that humanity has vastly less technology, because of this dark forest, he has achieved mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, and the way in which this is revealed to Trisolarians is pretty hilarious, right? We kind of skipped over it, but one day, Luoji wakes up, it gets evicted from his house because he's a sneaky drunk that's making the neighborhood's tax value go down, and so he like accepts his fate, leaves the house, and he brings I think he brings like a gun or something, and a few pieces of things, and he basically goes to the grave of the lady that the woman who made first contact. I forget her name. Wenjie, I think, or something. Wenjie. And he goes to her grave thinking that the Trisolarian cell phones, the spying computers, might notice him and be like, "Oh, what's this all about?" And he basically talks out into the cemetery, the empty cemetery, like, "Listen, I'm going to kill myself because I hate my life, but I'm going to take you with me if you don't stop this." And it's one of those he offers the Trisolarians Canadian healthcare basically, and all of a sudden three it wasn't just one, it was three monitoring computers, the Sophons, reveal themselves. They expand from the dimension, so they still had him under incredible surveillance. There were three eyeballs on him, and they basically say, okay, we surrender. Basically, what do you want?
Right, because what he's done is he's basically linked these bombs, right? That this kind of like you said, a tapestry to a dead man's switch, and he basically says, "I'm going to kill myself unless you do what I want."
We should say that the activation of the bombs are tied to his heartbeat. That's why he's going to kill himself.
Exactly. So the idea being, well, if he kills himself, his heart stops, the bombs explode, revealing these two locations. And it's interesting because I don't know if you remember from last time, guys, but we described the plans of the other wall facers, right? And the first one was kind of this American neocon, but the second is a very similar plan by Diaz, who is this kind of like South American strongman, and he plans a kind of a less intelligent version of the same idea. He basically says, "Well, I'll just make a bunch of nuclear bombs and blow them up, and I'll blow up the Earth unless they leave us alone." I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially his plan.
Yeah, it's essentially.
And again, he accomplishes this by means of a dead man switch, right? And this is something that's discussed at length, kind of this idea of, the nuclear dead man switch, right? This idea that, Russia had this program, and the US likely did as well, that if they were wiped out in a nuclear first strike, well, their bombs would automatically, launch towards America, assuring that both civilizations would be destroyed if one made a first move.
Yeah, and this is also something that the aliens themselves were not really capable of understanding due to their biology, because the Trisolarians, their thoughts are projected on their heads, and that's how they communicate. Like they project their thoughts as a form of light, kind of like octopus skin. They can't actually hide information from each other, and so the only way they can have military intelligence is essentially by not coming into contact with each other. If they ever come into contact with each other, they basically spill the beans on their plans. And so the idea that the humans would have this dead man switch, it's kind of an alien concept to them. They didn't expect this, and once they realized that, they that's the point when the Trisolarians, they do ultimately bow to the human demands for now. but they gain a new respect for humanity as like, okay, you are actually a threat despite not having our technology.
Right.
Like
And so this leads us into kind of a new stage where
a new era.
essentially a new era, right? And this is again a common theme through the book. And this is why I like it, because it's a very Chinese book in the sense that no Westerner really thinks like this, nor could have written this book. And so it's kind of refreshing because a lot of sci-fi is, essentially like globalist fan fiction.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that it's that is that the world is organized into eras, and they all have different names and they all kind of represent different stages of this kind of like cosmic struggle between, humanity and these alien civilizations. And so this, again, and we see this common motif of the wall facer, this starts a new era. And in this era, Luoji becomes a wall facer, literally. He sits in front of a wall all day with a dead man switch in his hand. And basically, the idea is that if anything is to happen, if the Trisolarans make a move, if they head for the Earth in any way, he's going to hit the button and he's going to essentially doom all human life. And essentially, the Trisolarans believe him. It's later revealed they've gamed this out. They've calculated it. And they calculate his threat rating is around 95%. Basically, they think that 95 out of 100 times they run the game or they run the simulation, he'd do it. He'd blow them both up. And so this essentially creates this kind of like uneasy stalemate between the two civilizations. The fleet turns away.
And this is something that's gone into more in book 3. At this point, we can go into book 3. But at the end of book 2, Luoji does, like, in the, it's called the deterrence era now. The crisis era was between First Contact and when Luoji made his threat, and now it's called the deterrence era. The pacifists that first told Earth or warned Earth, my civilization's violent, don't contact us. He's still alive. He was hibernating. The Trisolarians can hibernate too, like the humanity. And he wakes up basically to like thank Luoji for like achieving what he had hoped would happen, like a peaceful settlement. And so that the end of book 2 has this like beautiful line where like maybe we've sparked some light in the dark forest. It's not hopeless. Of course, in book 3 we discover that there's one weakness in any forest, be it Eden or the dark forest, and that is women.
So do you want to kind of launch into the initial hook of the first book?
A third book, or
no, sorry, the third book. Yes, I meant the next one. But you don't listen to what I say. Listen to what I mean.
I basically, the Trisolarians realized that as long as Luoji is what they call the sword holder, like the wall facer program's been retired, it kind of achieved its goals, and now they call it the sword holder, the guy who holds the doomsday button. Luoji holds that for a couple of decades. But he's getting old. Like he's now like entering his 90s or something, and so Trisolaris realizes they can't beat Luoji, but they can manipulate Earth to feel a little bit friendly. It's not so bad. We're friends now, right? And so the Trisolaris government begins essentially. I guess you could say they start pausing the Earth. they start pumping the Earth with mass media through the Sophon. The Sophons go from monitoring to essentially a interplanetary internet. And the Trisolarians are kind of forced to like pretend like they're helping humanity achieve new science. Although it's never quite stated if the Sophons are gone, right? They're clearly still there because they're using them to communicate. And so there's always a suspicion that, even though the Sophons are gone, it's weird that we're not having any new scientific achievements yet. And so there's always a suspicion that the Trisolarians are still not allowing humanity to progress scientifically. But now they're starting to pump the Earth full of essentially mass media that shows the Trisolarians as friendly, as like, oh, we get Earth culture. We're totally about this global homo stuff. You want to go into that a bit more?
Right. So there's several things that can make this book hard to summarize. One is that you jump around in time quite a lot. And so we're kind of jumping back and forth between two time periods. One, which is kind of the near future, right? Immediately after first contact, and then kind of the deterrence era, right? And we hop back and forth.
Oh yeah. Well, I forgot to mention. Book 3 opens in the medieval era.
Book 3 does open in the medieval era.
Do you want to give a quick summary of your favorite Byzantine prostitute?
So
it may not be relevant.
It's not. I'll put it this way. I'll tease it. I'll tease it because this is a completely accurate summary. And if you want to find out what the hell I'm talking about, well, you have to read it. Book 3 chronicles the adventures of a superpowered prostitute during the fall of Constantinople. And if you want to understand that, you're going to have to read this book.
Only in the first chapter. It's a little the author Shesheng Liu. He always has these bizarre out of like not science fiction openings for all of his books. Like in book 1, it was this like random like communist revolution in China scene that isn't really science fiction. Book 2, the opening, I forget what it was. It was like I forget. I think it was like a generic like Panama adventure, and then book 3 is like the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans. It's not exactly the kind of science fiction opening you'd expect.
Right. So essentially, when we're reading about the current time, like the closest time to us, I guess. So immediately after first contact in the third book, we're reading about essentially what was humanity's first couple of attempts at like long shot programs, right? So essentially this time, which is again, there are many kind of like similarities drawn to the Cold War, that there are these new kind of like international agencies, right? What is the one in the third book? What is it called? It has some incredibly generic name.
The Staircase Program?
No, but it's the name of the government organization that does it. I can't remember.
Interplanetary Defense or Planetary Defense?
Right. Yeah. It's something that generic, right?
UN gobbledygook.
Exactly. And so what this program is essentially, it is kind of like the best and brightest of kind of like, this international team. Right. And so it's brought together, a series of kind of like bright scientists, and it's headed up by this essentially like brutal, kind of like extremely cynical CIA agent, Thomas Wade, who runs this program with kind of an iron fist. And he's, described as incredibly, yeah, exactly. It being incredibly brutal. And especially in kind of the current time, the author, it seems to imply that most people think he's kind of going too far. But we have kind of two characters. So we have this guy named Yun, which that's how you say his name, right? I can't speak Chinese.
I think so. Yeah.
And Yun and this woman, Cheng Xin, who is the main character of the third one. Essentially, these two people went to school together. And Cheng is basically
we're getting those classic high school anime slides.
Yes, exactly, right? Because she's this like this perfect girl, but this guy's basically an incel, and he's an incel with terminal cancer.
Dang.
And so. Yeah, it's a bit rough for him. And at this time, the UN, in an attempt to raise money, is running kind of a gimmick where they basically are like, all right, pay us millions of China dollars, and we will sell you a star. And so this main character who has no friends, or this character, sorry, not the main character, who is this terminal cancer patient, has essentially come into a lot of money roughly a month or so before he's going to die. And he has no family. He doesn't want his sister to get it. And so just kind of on a lark, he decides to buy a star for this girl that he was friends with in college. He hasn't talked to in years. He's kind of a failure. And it's revealed that, in the intervening time, she has been kind of brought into this government project. And this government project has a Hail Mary idea that what they're going to do is they're essentially, and this is kind of stupid, but it turns out to not be such a bad idea. They're going to find someone who is going to die anyway, ask them to, voluntarily commit suicide so that they can essentially freeze dry their brain and send it into space with the hope that the Trisolarans can basically replicate a human And the idea is like, oh, well, maybe if they understand us, they'll have sympathy on us. And so, this woman essentially is like, all right, well, I bet I could get this guy from college to kill himself. He seemed to like me.
It's such
And,
a ridiculous opening, but it's great.
It is. And the thing is, he does it. He goes for it. He's already going to die anyway. So it is revealed after his death, she has no idea that he basically, committed this extravagant gesture for her, spent, tens of millions of dollars to buy her a star. And so, of course, she feels awful. And again, we see another character who is, put into hibernation, right? The idea is that this project is viewed as potentially being important. And so they need to, send someone into the future who understands the details of it. Unfortunately, after she's already frozen, the launch goes wrong, right? This brain is just kind of slung off into space and no one can really tell.
Yeah. But
she's eventually, we find out that that's not true, but in the moment we think that. And do you want to kind of like get back to the point where she's, woken up?
Yeah. So, she like a lot of people in the 21st century, when this like imaginary hibernation technology gets invented, it opens the door for them to do intergenerational planning against the alien threat. And so she's one of the people, along with Thomas Wade, to decide the staircase program is important. We should hop into the future and like see if it works, basically. I forget why she goes to the future for the staircase program, right? Like a kind of like long-term planning for it.
I believe so. Yes, she's considered like that. There's a good chance that this might actually be something that either that or some other project. I can't remember, but it's tangentially related to that.
Yeah. So she wakes up in the future after I think she wakes up in the deterrence era, doesn't she?
Yes, she does.
So she wakes up after the threat's already been dealt with. Humanity is pretty confident that Trisolaris is like not going to invade. They have peace treaties. They have, interplanetary internet with the Sophons. And so her first thing that she does when she opens up, first she checks on the star to see how much it's worth. It's worth a lot. And the second that she does is goes watch a movie made by Trisolarian, basically. Like someone sent them the zip file over the Sophons to watch a movie made on Trisolaris. And all of humanity is pretty convinced that Trisolaris has learned from the superior human culture how not to be so violent and genocidal. Because the movie was a brilliant depiction of culture, understanding human intelligence and everything. Of course, just to sneak ahead a little bit, what turns out to be the case is that the staircase program succeeded. The Trisolarians got what's his name's brain, built him a clone body without cancer, and essentially used his brain to understand human culture. So all these films and media supposedly made by Trisolarians were actually just made by him working for the Trisolarians. And because now the Trisolarians have a model of the human brain, they can kind of simulate personality tests on different people. That's how they figured out Luoji would press the button with this like human brain sample that they can like use to simulate personalities. They essentially have like the Trisolarians gain the ability to essentially create a digital clone of anyone they want on the ships and evaluate their psychology on the ship through the brain. Essentially, I'm going a little bit into details hashed out in the like semi-official fourth book, but it's kind of implied within the third book too. And so essentially, humanity through this like media campaign by the Trisolarians decide that maybe we're good. Maybe we can just go on with our lives. And they get the really dumb idea to democratize the sword holder position. Democracy. And so what we see is I forget how she becomes so popular though, if you might remember it better. But she basically becomes
if I'm not mistaken, because the star she's been given is worth so much money, she essentially the UN discovers, that there's something they want there. And so they offer her, an astronomical sum of money. And again, she, ends up, with her kind of like assigned partner, selling off this star to the UN, and she becomes, fabulously wealthy. And through that, and through some other, I guess, reasons I don't particularly remember, she becomes kind of a media sensation. Because again, it's described the entire time that she's incredibly charming, everyone likes her. And because she's kind of like out of time, she becomes a media sensation.
Yeah, and that's a minor detail brought up that's really important. People from the 21st century have greater gender differences. The people of the 23rd century are very paused, very like gender neutral. And so anyone that like actually has like femininity or masculinity is this weird out of culture, out of time sample that gets really popular. So like you basically have these people that are like just normal people to us as like curiosities to the future, and it makes them really popular.
Right. And so essentially what happens is that the society has gained a lot, in the time sense, since Luoji has, entered the deterrence era. And so part of that is that they have advanced on certain civilizational metrics. And one of them is that they've developed this technology, we don't need to get into it, that essentially allows them to make giant antennas. And these antennas, and there are initially planned to be quite a lot of them, can broadcast, the locations, right? This essentially this like nuclear option, to everyone very, very quickly. And so this is essentially like a nuclear silo, so to speak.
Yeah. So Luoji's solution with the dust cloud isn't a permanent one. It never could be. And so instead, the Trisolarians agree to help the humans build these silos, like a good word for them. They're radio dishes that can broadcast the signal that Luoji has. And so essentially, it's really weird that the Trisolarians are helping build these things that could end their own world. But it's kind of like a peace gesture to help the humans calm down a bit. Eventually, though, some humans get a little genocidal and like push the fucking button already. Get it over with, right? And this causes a bit of a fear between both worlds, and so it's decided that the number of broadcast stations should be vastly reduced to a handful. And it's kind of implied that these plots may have been stirred by the Trisolarians to start with, like almost like a return to the old ETO, the human allies of the aliens. It's never directly stated, but I kind of got the sense that like a lot of these attempts to activate the stations were part of Trisolaris's pacification of humanity. Like, oh, you humans, you can't be trusted to guard these towers. You can't have as many. Stop being so militant. You're not trustworthy. It's kind of like a projection from the Trisolarians. And so essentially the number of them get reduced because of the fear that some terrorist group might activate them. And some of them get off-world and put on some of the ships out in space so that they're completely out of the reach of humanity.
Right. So essentially what happens is that when the vote comes up, for who is going to replace Luoji, as the sword holder, there are a number of candidates, right? And the majority of them, it's described, are essentially 21st century men, men who for whatever reason were frozen. And they're described as being, like hard and brooding, kind of like more masculine, hyper masculine compared to these kind of like effete, men of the deterrence era. And prime among them is a character that, was kind of, relevant to the first part of the book. And that's Wade, right? This American spy, And so he basically says, to this woman, you're too nice for it. You won't do it. You need someone like me who's a terrible person. And he says that very directly. He basically says like, look, like you need someone who's actually going to do it. And she blows him off. And this culminates that he's so committed to doing this that he actually tries to kill her. Yeah. And he basically is like, well, I won't let you do it, because you're the worst person. And the cops end up stopping him. He's sentenced to prison because it's described that they haven't really had a murder in quite a long time, because the state is so good at preventing them that they very rarely have violent crimes. And basically, she is elected as the sword holder. But within moments of her accepting it, they launch a full-scale assault. That these probes basically head straight for all of these these antenna, the antenna that
Yeah.
still exist.
They basically reduced the number of antennas to the number of probes, and that was the gambit. One probe can destroy each antenna, and thereby cut humanity off from being able to conduct any mutually assured destruction. And the story kind of cuts off here to go for a tangent. So we basically end the scene with humanity losing the signals. Sorry, my brain's not working so well.
Yeah, no worries, man. And so this brings up another plot point from the last one, right? Which is these few ships that managed to escape, and are headed off into kind of like interstellar space. These were refugees from this initial battle. And again, we see this concept of the dark forest kind of teased when initially these two ships are actually two groups of ships. And in the cold vacuum of space, everyone comes to the realization that, well, in order for some of us to make it, some of us are going to have to die. And so they all turn their guns on each other, right?
Yeah,
and humanity, which at this point is, incredibly paused, is still pursuing these people. Again, because of the distances involved, these pursuits take decades, And so what eventually happens is that one of these ships, and there's been a drama between these two, ships going back and forth. They press the button. So the signal, right? Even though this woman, who is essentially too soft to do it, she can't bring herself to press the button. It goes out anyway.
Yeah, and it's really cool because like the people that press the button on that ship are 21st century men who were resurrected to like lead the battles because they're still able to do war fighting. So like all the admirals and officers on the ship, or most of them are 21st century men, and they look particularly stronger than the soldiers that they have running the ships. And essentially there's this scene like I said, after the dishes on Earth are destroyed by the droplets, the probes, it cuts to the ships and kind of their adventures and how, like, for a good part of the book, they're focusing on the ships, and you don't really know what's happening on Earth. And essentially, they present the humans from the 21st century on the ships. The ships finally make contact with each other. There's a whole hula blah, but essentially they agree not to go back to Earth, and they basically look at the photos of like the droplets coming or something like that. No, sorry, I'm confused again. Because they're further out from Earth, they discover that Trisolaris has in fact launched a new fleet, a second fleet. And Earth hasn't learned about it yet because they're still like a light year away, basically. This is like way the heck out in deep space. And they decide by the time humanity learns about these ships, it's no doubt that like the Trisolarians are playing us. Something's up. So we have a choice to either send the signal before the ships arrive and like mess up the Trisolarian schedules, or go our separate ways and never look back. And it's decided that if the signal isn't sent, humanity is probably going to get wiped out by this second fleet. If the signal is sent, it gives humanity at least a little bit of time to get out of Dodge. At that point, we then cut forward to Earth again. And we find out that since the dishes have been destroyed, humanity has essentially been occupied by this like robot and her droplets, right? We didn't mention the robot at all, did we?
Yeah, so sorry. And again, this is an incredibly complicated series. And so we're trying to kind of get through it as best we can, but we're not doing it justice.
They're dense.
They're dense books, and they're not dense in a useless way. They're dense with useful, like relevant information. But essentially, the Trisolarians have kind of made a robot, an extremely lifelike android, to essentially act as a spokesperson. And this brings up an interesting theme because this this communicant, is basically Japanese. So it turns out that aliens are weebs.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning. The author is Chinese, and he based the Trisolarians largely off of the behaviors of the Japanese during the occupation of China in World War II. And the Japanese have this peculiar behavior where they will not respect you if you can't fight, And if you can fight, you'll earn their respect, but they'll still want to kill you the second you show any weakness. And so this is basically like the ethos of the occupying Tricelarian machines. Again, the fleet. We're going to bounce around a lot here because there's a lot of dense information, but essentially what happens at the same time, the fleet out in deep space discovers the second fleet's traveling at much higher speeds than the first fleet. So rather than taking 400 years, that second fleet's going to get there in 4 years. Their signal to Earth can make it there in 1 year. So essentially, they have like 3 years to figure out what to do. There's a bunch of timelines. I'm messing it up. At the same time, the robot on Earth is essentially the mouthpiece of the droplets, who are now essentially threatening Earth to do what they want or blow up a city. Every time Earth doesn't do what they want, they blow up a city with the droplets. The droplets come in and basically blow up a city. And eventually humanity submits to the droplets. Because again, these are like indestructible machines, and they can travel through anything because they're made of strong forces. And so the robot is basically their mouthpiece and the droplets of the sword. And so what the droplets demand, or what the Tricelarians demand, is all humans have to go to Australia, sentenced to Australia, because the Tricelarians no longer want to wipe humanity out. Now they kind of want to do a reservation system, because the Tricelarians realize it's really useful to have a species that can lie when they can't. So like, the Tricelarians are attempting to co-opt human biology into their empire, because clearly these creatures are capable of destroying them, even though they don't have the same technology. So it's probably useful to keep these things around, but let's limit them to like a few 100,000 on a random island and just like kind of keep them in reservation. So at the same time, humanity is being forcefully relocated to Australia, and humanity has set up this like caste system. I'm sorry, Tricelarians set up this caste system where like Earth's armies get rewarded for doing their bidding. And so the droplets basically threaten Earth's armies to do what they want, and Tricelarian thus invents an invasion army out of humanity, which is kind of it's a clever device. So Tricelarians can't get an army on Earth fast enough. Let's just make the humans into our army by threatening them. And lo and behold, it works. The Tricelarians have a system where Earth's armies do their bidding. Earth's populations get moved to Australia, and the droplets are essentially destroying any city that doesn't want to comply. And this sets up a dictatorship on Earth, ran by humans, but ran by the Tricelarians, but the hands are humans. And it's a really fun thing. And this temporary empire is like kind of colonial empire that the Tricelarians set up on Earth is working. And then they realize that of course the Tricelarian invasion fleet traveling at light speed is zooming is on its way, and it kind of looks like oh crap, we've lost. This is it. Yay, we're not going to get exterminated, but we're going to be reduced to 100,000 people. There's the cannibal scene where the Tricelarians are like, well, the humans are like, how are you going to feed us all on Australia? And the Tricelarians are like, you're made of food. Figure it out yourselves. We don't care. And it's kind of this really disturbing scene where the Tricelarians are once again their vicious, normal way. And once again, a lot of this is based off what Japan did in invading China. Obviously, Japan is a very small empire. It can't rule all of China with its own people. And so Japan set up this it's like caste system, basically, as they invaded and took over China. And sometimes you would just like starve a city out and have the inhabitants eat themselves. And there were many famous cases in the invasion of China where Japan basically just forced the city to eat itself and reduce its population to manageable levels. And so a lot of this is kind of like reevaluating Japan's strategy for conquering China in terms of how Tricelarius conquers Earth with like an android and 12 droplets or something like that. Okay, that's hopefully a normal review. Like that's a broad stroke. It's a very complicated part of the book, and I wanted to just very quickly get it out there so we can get on with it. But to return to the ships that sent the signal, would you like to go into what happens as a result of that signal being sent from the ships?
So, and what happens is at first we don't know how these ships were able to send out the signal, because along with the pursuing ship sent out from Earth to bring back these quote unquote war criminals to justice, there's one of these probes as kind of a peace gesture, like, oh, we're both going after this together. And in this frantic race to get to what essentially is quote unquote the button, right, to send out this signal. This probe is rushing towards the ship to essentially stop them. They're trying to destroy them. And then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, it just stops. And this is something that even at this kind of like relatively advanced level of technology, humanity's never been able to do. They simply do not comprehend how they even possibly could stop this probe. But all of a sudden it just stops. And so the signal is sent out. And within, I think it's a few years, right? We find out later. We'll come back to this. But Trisolaris is destroyed, completely demolished. And essentially the way it's done is that a super dense, kind of like rock, for the lack of better terms, is thrown into the sun from someone extremely quickly and essentially causes the sun or one of the suns of Trisolaris to expand. We're skipping over details, and essentially consume the solar system, right? Like wipes it completely out.
Yeah. And we kind of skipped over, but essentially, as a result of this signal being sent out, Trisolaris realizes that there's no longer any point taking over the Earth because it will soon be destroyed. Trisolaris makes its best efforts to prepare for its own destruction, because Trisolaris now realizes we're doomed too. Like, why would you do this, humanity? You've doomed us both. But Trisolaris also makes a kind of like actual peace gesture, because they respect Luoji, because he was the only human able to contend with them. They tell Luoji, we'll answer 3 questions of yours, bearing that they don't threaten our own existence. We'll give you that. We'll give you 3 pieces of information. Thanks for the death wish, humanity. It was fun. We're both fucked. Have fun. Bye. See you never. And so Luoji asks these 3 questions of like, is there a way to stop a Dark Force strike? Is there a way to like a bunch of questions regarding like how to figure this out? And the Trisolarians are never willing to say too much, because they know that anything they tell humanity might one day come back to bite them, if they ever make contact with humanity again. But this is like essentially the great divorce between humanity and Trisolaris, where they're like, okay, humanity, you press the red button, you fucked us both. We never want to talk to you again. We're gonna leave you on read here out. And so a few years later, Trisolaris blows up in the night sky. Everyone sees it from Earth. The star goes supernova, and we kind of and there's a final meeting with the robot. The robot stays on Earth, obviously. Where she says something along the lines of humanity is like, well, you're still working, so there's clearly some Trisolarians still alive. And she basically says the ones in the first fleet are still alive, and that's it. Right? Like she basically says, and the second fleet, but like the robot reveals there's still Trisolarians out there on the fleets that were sent out, and we never want to talk to you again. You've doomed our worlds. This is it. Bye. Sorry for jumping around so much.
No, not at all, because it's hard to explain this all at once. And so what that essentially leads us to is a kind of a repeat, or a similar situation, where humanity knows there's a strike coming from somewhere, they don't know where, on the Earth, that will destroy the Earth. And so what they assume, logically enough, is that it'll be the same thing. That a rock, for the sake of simplicity, will be thrown at the sun, which causes a chain reaction, which will kind of blast solar radiation. And so that leads them to to another discussion, right? As a civilization, like, what are we to do? And there are kind of a variety of ideas. One is basically, we're going to have to escape. Okay. 2 is that we're going to hide. And the way we're going to hide is we're going to hide out kind of behind the gas giants, right? We're just going to make these little floating cities, and Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune, they will protect us. We'll hide in their shadow. And there's kind of a running theme throughout these books of what's called escapism, right? And escapism is the idea that we're going to need to leave the solar system. But the reason you can't allow it is that when you escape, only some people can make it. And so obviously, no one wants to deal with the problem of who do you select. So this has been made a extreme moral taboo, on the level of like, rape or incest, anything. Like it is that level of unthinkability. And so what happens is that humanity decides to go with the idea that they're going to hide.
Yeah.
And what happens is, while they were in Australia, as all people were, this woman whose name I keep forgetting. What's her name again?
AA.
Oh no, not AA. There is a character named AA.
Yeah.
She's relevant. We've kind of skipped over her, which is kind of
can we briefly say a kudos to the level of memery this book has to our current era?
Oh yeah, because there is a significant character that we have not mentioned, but is quite relevant, called AA, and that's mildly amusing.
Who acts like AA and has the same credentials,
mannerisms. Yeah.
No,
also similar.
Also the same degrees as AA. Our AA.
Oh yeah, actually, you're right.
And
which is just like an amusing, but
and there's also the ship named Bronze Age, which has a literal Bronze Age mindset.
Okay, that's actually kind of funny. There are a lot of correlates.
This book predicted the 2010s and the 2020s. I'm convinced it's like some kind of time travel nonsense. But anyway, sorry for cutting you off there. This is a funny
to go back, while they were in Australia, Shang Xin and Thomas Wade, after an attempted murder, end up meeting each other again. So they've established contact. He's served his time, and basically, she understandably feels like a complete failure. She is incredibly rich from selling the star. Her company has become, she started a company that's, now become this like industrial giant. But she understandably feels like a pariah. She messed it up. It didn't end up mattering, but she was not up to the task. And so Wade comes back to her and basically says, look, you're not up to this, but give me your resources. Let me do whatever I want with them, and I'll fix this. And she basically says, all right, with a few stipulations. One, you're not going to do anything that harms humanity, which is, again, vague woman stuff. and two, I get a veto on anything we do. She was like, yes, of course.
Thomas Wade made the mistake that many people do while working for the Daily Wire. Let's just say that.
No comment. And so what he essentially says is like, all right, and you can sleep and we'll wake you up when something interesting happens. So, she goes back into hibernation and she wakes up on one of these floating cities. Essentially, at this point, I think it's like 75 years, separated. Humanity has almost entirely moved to these kind of like floating cities. And the idea is, these are places where we can hide. And there's an interesting description of all of them. And the reason that she's brought back is it turns out, well, Thomas Wade did what Thomas Wade always did, which is act ruthlessly. And so what he was doing was basically developing faster than light travel. And
which is illegal because humanity doesn't want anyone escaping like those other ships did.
Right. Which is highly, highly illegal. And so basically, what they do is, and I should say that the reason, one of the most interesting aspects of this third book is that, how we mentioned before that the Chinese incel has been kind of cloned by the Trisolarans.
Yeah.
And his main output there was a series of stories. Right?
Yeah,
and these stories were the way that Trisolarans understood human culture. And it said that he wrote over 100 of these. And they're basically like folk tales, kind of like fairy tales. And all of these were transmitted. And there's a scene kind of close to the end of Trisolarans, leaving, bidding humanity their goodbye, where he has a conversation with this woman. And it's revealed as part of this that the Trisolarans will, if they think that he's revealing too much, they'll basically cut the link. They'll basically, without putting too fine a point on it, they'll basically like blow it up.
Yeah.
And so he gives her a series of kind of cryptic instructions, and cryptic clues. And one of these clues is basically, he says like, oh, do you remember when we used to tell each other stories when we were kids? Now the main character is like, internally, of course, this didn't happen. This isn't true. So she kind of perks up. And this story he tells her is a very elaborate kind of like fairy tale, which we can't really summarize. But buried within that, and this interpretation of this fairy tale essentially becomes a whole discipline of human study. It is a series of principles that become important later. So if you may remember, and I kind of teased this earlier, that there was no one really knew why this probe failed when they were about to send out the signal. And it turns out that just by sheer accident, they came into a area where the fourth dimension was collapsing into the third. So there was kind of little pockets of the fourth dimension. And they were able to essentially, from the fourth dimension, it's described that the third looks like a drawing, right? So there's no such thing as a container. You can see through anything. You can see through the details in anything. And so essentially what happened is not a particularly intelligent strategy, is that they were in an area where you could, standing in certain places, with certain scientific equipment, you could look into any box. And it turns out that this probe was basically a fancy box. And so they just reached into it and rummaged around until it stopped working. Right? But
once again, the caveman strategy.
Exactly. But this does indicate, this idea of dimensionality. And when they're in the fourth dimension, what they realize is that this kind of eternal law of entropy, which is kind of one of the most disturbing things about the scientific universe. And they meet a fourth dimensional being. And the fourth dimensional being essentially tells them, my dimension is collapsing. There will soon be none of me left. And what is essentially revealed is that the dark forest has always existed. And the primary way to sort of attack a civilization is to create a collapsing dimension. And this has happened on a universe-wide scale, essentially 9 or 10 times. And so what happens is that when these hunters reach out for Earth, they don't do it the same way they did last time, because it turns out that Earth is more dangerous. What they do is they collapse the Earth into the second dimension. Now we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, because the reason that this woman has been woken up is essentially that Thomas Wade is at it again. And he's essentially in a Ruby Ridge style standoff with the government, where it's been revealed that he's developed faster than light travel through essentially interpreting, these fairy tales into kind of scientific data, which is its own segment of the book that we can't really get into for the sake of time, but is absolutely fascinating. And basically they woke her up to basically be like, all right, talk this guy down. We can't get him to stop it. He's threatening to do something drastic, but maybe you can talk him down. And again, because Thomas Wade is a man of his word, she does it. She tells him to stop down. She tells him to stand down, give up to the government.
He also had those he had those antimatter guns, you might remember.
Right. So I won't get into that, but essentially he's developed the ability to cause a mass amount of damage. So
he's space big boss. He has this outer heaven with advanced technology.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a good analogy.
And he wants to bring humanity into the next stage of development. He basically found a way to avoid the Sophons if there's any even still around. And he wants to get humanity out of the solar system because he doesn't think it's going to be like the other destructions. Humanity has to leave the solar system if it wants to survive.
And so essentially, she does it again. She tells him to stand down, and almost at the same time, this attack is launched. And at first, no one really knows what it is. But what happens is essentially the solar system starts collapsing into the second dimension at a speed that essentially nothing other than faster than light travel can get away from it. It's essentially this sinkhole.
And it's mentioned that people think, well, at first people think that eventually this bomb, it's just going to destroy the sun, will be fine. But it turns out that it will never stop sucking in things around it. It's basically going to keep doing that forever, and that there are a lot of parts of the third dimensional universe that we live in that are like that. And it eventually has turned out, the book postulates that that's what dark matter is. Dark matter is collapsed into 2D. Dark matter is the gravity left over from collapsed two-dimensional space, a collapsed three-dimensional space into two-dimensional. And so humanity experiences this slow death over a number of months, basically. And And the story basically shifts from like over the course of these months. Well, like what can be done? Every couple of every couple of parts of the book, another planet sinks into the collapse. Eventually, Earth collapses into it. Initially, I forgot the characters. Xing and her assistant AA. They visit Earth one last time to like try and figure out solutions, and there's no hope, and so they leave. Turns out Luoji's still alive out on Pluto, trying to collect all of Earth's arts as an arc for when the solar system is gone. You might want to mention like the ship he's on, but basically, even though Thomas Wade eventually gets executed for his crimes, he has this like cigar scene, makes him even more like Big Boss. But
and so what happens, right, is we find out that Thomas Wade actually wins in the end. That in addition to that, he actually made one prototype. He made one, they call them like inertial drives, which is basically a way to cheat the speed of light. And it turns out that in this kind of like odd move, he gave this woman, who's essentially ruined everything, the ability to basically travel anywhere in the universe faster than light. Now, the problem is, right, the laws of relativity still apply, which means that, while for her, very little time is passing, hundreds of years are passing, as far as the universe goes. And so what happened is during this conversation with, the terminal incel, he basically, the last thing he says is like, meet me at our star. So what she basically decides to do is head for the star that, she ended up selling, but let's be honest, they're all dead. So it's hers again, with the expectation that she'll meet this guy again. And when they get there, right, it's habitable. It's a kind of a shitty planet, but nonetheless, they end up meeting, another guy, a guy who turns out is the descendant, because again, hundreds of years have passed, of humanity on these two ships, which means that great, humanity has survived. And he describes the fact that, humanity is still around. Yeah, they're in the stars, but things aren't going so well. It sucks.
Because they haven't found a planet as good as Earth yet. It turns out Earth was literally the best planet in that region of the galaxy, and that's why Tricerators wanted it, and there really isn't anything like it. And so humanity's kind of scratching a living off of these planets that are like near Earth's, but they're like, heavy gravity, low gravity, health problems. Humanity is essentially like scratching a living off of rocks, and they don't really know what to do. Sorry.
Right. And so what is the second kind of like major reveal is that whereas there is an attack, right, which is collapsing a dimension, there is also essentially an ultimate defense. And the ultimate defense is kind of this devil's bargain, and we won't get into the science because one, it's fake science, and two, I can't remember it, where basically you can put a hard cap. You can limit the speed of light within a certain area. And so the upside to that is that it basically stops the ability of anyone reaching out to destroy you. They can't do it. It basically creates a black hole from the outside looking in. But on the inside, again, it limits the speed of light, which means computers don't work. You're never getting out. And so essentially it's an ultimate turtle strategy. And what is revealed is that kind of like through this strange series of events, which again, we're over time, so I'm kind of skimming over. One of these is created. And so this new man and this woman are separated and essentially cast forward, millions of years in time, again, because of the way relativity works, traveling faster than light. And they're again stuck in this black hole. They're never getting out until. Do you want to pick up here, Luthemplaer?
Yeah, sorry, we've been skipping around a lot. I'm trying to follow it myself. It is a very dense book, but
it's very dense, and we're over time, and I don't quite want to do a third episode, but I also don't want to be here for 3 hours.
Yeah, we're close enough to the end that we could basically just say it. This microcosm that they find, well, we should have said it was from the incel character who stayed on the fleet of the Tricerators and eventually got off with a lot of their technology. One of them was these little pocket universes. And he basically invites her to enjoy a pocket universe with whoever she wants. They get separated, so it can't be him. Poor incel boyfriend. Eternal incel. But she falls into this pocket dimension with the other human remnant. And they just decide to live for 18 million years in a paused time area, and like have a happy life with a copy of the Sophon robot that was from before. And they just live there. They dream it, and until eventually a signal comes in from the outside saying, there's too much matter in these pocket universes. Please empty them immediately. And at this point, it gets very, in my opinion, the story kind of jumps the shark here. It doesn't really have a lot of like consistency here, but essentially the story ends with them leaving the pocket universe into the main universe once more, with the hope that maybe the universe has collapsed enough that it will somehow restart.
There will be a new Big Bang. And so I agree that the ending kind of sucks, but there's kind of this moment, right, where it's revealed that they aren't the only ones who've thought of this pocket universe strategy, but there's an attempt made to kind of broadcast, someone out there, broadcasting to all these pocket universes, basically saying like, you guys need to come back or it won't start over. The universe will just die. There'll be no second one. And that's so it creates this kind of like cosmic, like high score billboard where the basically thousands of languages from all of these civilizations are sent out. And it says, it describes there's days and days of the simple message in thousands upon thousands of different languages. But it's revealed that both human language and Trisolaran made it, which means that even though our main characters missed it, both of those civilizations at least lasted long enough to be considered significant. So that's kind of the end, and I don't love the ending. I'd say out of all of them, you kind of have to read all of them to get the full story. And there are parts of the first and third book that are amazing. But to me, the second is my favorite. This kind of like advanced game theory, kind of like mapping out like how do you beat, this kind of like unwinnable foe with limited resources, I think is very interesting. So are there kind of, broad themes you want to, examine with Luthemplaer as we kind of, wrap this up? Are you still there? I don't. Oh, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, you're back.
It was a lightning strike here.
No worries.
What were you up to?
No. So, we have finished the plot summary. I'm asking if there are any themes you want to talk about, kind of over the course of the whole series.
Yeah, so I think that like this is basically the Kruger effect graph, Dunning-Kruger effect applied to a story, where like humanity consistently thinks it's like the top-notch best, and then reveals that the universe is more complicated than they assumed. And then there's always that like adaptation phase when it's never quite a perfect fit, but it works. I think my favorite thing about the story was that it does create a powerful, believable explanation for the what do you call it, the paradox. You can't see any alien life. There doesn't seem to be any alien life. On one of my Substack posts was basically going through all the metrics that you could find alien life with, and how they're all, no matter how complicated or simple, they're all negative. There really is. At this point, it does seem like we're the only life in the universe, like as if either they're hiding or they don't exist. And this story provides a really good explanation for why they would be hiding. There are little like things that happen in this book that kind of tickle your noggin if you notice them. Like at one point we do see the aliens we assume are the ones sending the dimensional collapse to Earth, like the weapon that will destroy it. But if you look at the dating for every chapter opens with like a date of when it's happening, because it's such a long time span. It's actually dated to a year after the solar system was destroyed, and so it's kind of implied that the alien we're seeing prepare this doomsday weapon to destroy the Earth, it's actually late. That weapon's going to arrive to an already destroyed solar system, and so it's just like that brutal out there. I think also another thing that's really cool, like the fact that all those languages are presented at the end, kind of does mean that near the end of the universe, aliens were like, all the civilizations, including humanity, were kind of like forced to work together to figure out how to stop the cold death, the cold death of the universe. So like given enough constraints, life will forcefully be forced to work together. And so, in those languages, you see not only humanity languages, but also Trisolarian. So it implies that at some point in time, Trisolarians and humanity did manage to actually live in peace. So it's very dark. It's very, very dark, but it also has that little like bit of hope at the end that like, yeah, well, eventually the universe is going to get to such a state that you have to work together. I don't know. There's a lot of what are some themes you picked up on this trilogy?
So one of the things I think is interesting is that, especially in the third book, there's kind of this recurring theme of, pragmatism, right? The idea that this kind of like squishy liberal values, if you follow them in a time of necessity, will continually screw you over.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of vacillation between humanity becoming kind of decadent and then getting smacked down. And then once they kind of regain confidence, they become decadent again and they lose their practicality and then they get smacked down again. And so you see this specifically in the character of Thomas Wade. There's also this kind of recurring theme of great men being hated, right? So men who do the difficult thing, who do what needs to be done, are continually social pariahs.
That's really important because like a lot of people in this side think, oh, like, Caesar will be popular, Caesar will be loved by the people. In reality, any Caesarian figure in history, even if they accomplish their goals, they're always hated, they're always killed, they're always spit on. Like, you will not save people and be loved.
Right. And I think there's also a strong theme, and we mentioned this the first time, of the different roles of men and women.
Oh yeah.
And specifically the chaos that allowing women to lead in times of crisis can cause.
Yeah, like this book is very Chinese traditional gender roles. Like women will end your civilization if you put them in control. and well, like if you read the reviews of this book, it's very popular in China and it's very criticized in the West. And these are the reasons why. Like this book spits on the face of Western values, basically.
Right. And I think also it's a profoundly, I don't know, it's a profoundly Chinese book. And so it's interesting because, again, the characters don't react in ways that you would imagine Westerners would. And I think it's interesting just alone for that. So again, I'm not trying to take up a lot of time because, I've got to go sooner or later and we're already over time. But I consider this just a full recommend from me. You guys should read this book. There are free audiobooks available on YouTube, if you care to look for them. And it's probably the first piece of sci-fi I've read written after the Cold War that's really, truly good. It's worth your time. I hope that this is kind of a primer because we didn't cover everything. There are definitely things that we had to skim over either for time, or to kind of explain it in a roughly linear way. But I would say, this is wholeheartedly worth your time, guys.
Yeah, same for me. I mean, I only discovered this book this year, or rather last year. It was recommended to me. I forget who recommended it to me, but I really like I mean, there are Western characters in here, but they're kind of like, they are a bit exaggerated in a respectable way that make you kind of reevaluate yourself. I think a lot of Westerners have this assumption that they are the neutral culture and everything around them is like a flavor and they're neutral. Like the West has achieved true neutrality, true objectivity, even though they deny both. And this book does a good job of explaining why the Western individualist view is just another flavor that has its own faults, and it's useful sometimes, but it has its own faults and sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and it does a good job of it's kind of a counter to the the baby boomer view that essentially they're just like us. That every culture is essentially the same, and what they really just want is to be American. They want our stuff. They just want to come to America and buy pickup trucks and consume. And this is good because it shows you that civilizations are fundamentally different, and that different types of civilizations and different types of biology produce radically different outcomes. Like, obviously there is an alien civilization that is so alien that they don't even have a concept of falsehood, right? And so again, like, this book is simultaneously like a mix of based and cringe. Like it does have a strong materialist atheist streak in it. Like, religious people are dumb and crazy. But there's a lot to be had from this book, and even just as like an entertainment product, it is very fun to read. It's probably more literary than most sci-fi. Like, he's a good writer. You know, it's always difficult in translation, but nonetheless, right, there is a lot of like it can in many places just like a very beautiful read.
Yeah. There was this really cool post on a blog somewhere where someone took the Chinese of the Tricelarian response in the first book and ran it through all the ways you could theoretically translate it into English. And a lot of them are radically different than what is in the book officially. And it kind of makes you realize, like, you know, you're not just translating from Chinese to English, you're translating like imagine it's kind of implied. Well, imagine how different it would be if Tricelarian was real. Yeah, I mean, a full recommend for me. It's about like maybe like you can listen to it in about a few hours every week of every day of a week and get done in a week. It's a nice long read, and I think by the end of it, you're going to look at the night sky at night and think a few things you haven't thought before.
Yeah. So guys, check this one out. And again, thank you so much for coming on, Luthemplaer. I know this is a lot of your time.
Yeah.
So if people want to find more of your work, obviously you don't primarily cover sci-fi, but where can people find you?
Luthnight.substack.com, which should be linked here somewhere. I think I sent to you last time, or I could send it again. That I like to write on Substack, and I like to make AI art on the Telegram. And well, hopefully I'll be doing more creative stuff. I'm just kind of like sick right now.
Well, fair enough, man. And again, like I enjoy having you on, and obviously this is something that I have to thank you for, because I read the first book when it first was translated, and it just didn't stick with me for whatever reason. And I'm really glad that I went back to it. You know, it stuck in my brain for a long time, which is pretty rare because I read a lot, and oftentimes, like, if something isn't particularly like interesting, it just, you know, kind of comes in one ear and out the other. So again, thank you so much for showing this to me. And obviously, guys, you know, Luthemplaer's links are down in the description. You know, you can check him out. And as far as my links, right, like, you know where to find me. This is on YouTube. You can also find it on Apple, Spotify, you know, anywhere you listen to audio only shows. In addition, you should check me out on Twitter. I've been getting a massive, you know, influx of new people. I cannot comment on the quality of my Twitter account, but it is there. So how's that for a
for all your Rod Gear takes? That's what I follow for. I follow for all the.
You mean not for me just retweeting the most rancid like shitlib takes that I find?
Yeah,
I'm like, they have to read this.
I'm just here pissing off everyone if I can. But yeah, I mean, hopefully in the future I'll have a few more sci-fi recommendations. I have a very rich library of weird and curious books like this.
I've got an idea. You know what I'm gonna make you do?
What?
Have you read Gene Wolfe yet?
This sounds familiar. Tell me more.
Gene Wolfe has a series. Oh, what is it called? The Something of the New Sun. Sorry, let me look up exactly what it is before I tell you wrong. Gene Wolfe. It is. Oh yeah, the book of the New Sun.
You might tell me this actually. I'll look it up.
Read that. Come back here, and we'll have another conversation on it, because it is my favorite sci-fi. It's 100% the opposite direction. It is super surreal and very weird. But you know what? Yeah, in chat, Perplexity says, I'm reading it right now. It's fantastic.
Nice.
So you should come back and read that. It's a little bit shorter, but it's extremely weird. And we should have a discussion on that, because I want to have you back on, and I want to talk more about literature, because this is not well known, but I probably am, if I could be considered to actually know what I'm talking about in any field, it's literature. And so I want to bring that more onto the show. Anyway, guys, like I said, we're gonna have to wrap this one up. But you know, check me out obviously on, you know, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. I'm running a promotion now where if you guys send me a screenshot, you know, of you reviewing the Jay Burden Show on, you know, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you review podcasts, you will be entered in to win a $50 gift card to Antelope Hill Publishing, right, which has lots of great books. And anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming out. And remember, keep your head up, guys. The lie can't last forever. Good night.